Hey guys! Tonight, we slip back through time, into the dim and smoky streets of Victorian London, where the year is somewhere in the late 1800s, and the frost is already clawing at the edges of your coat. You can almost see your own breath puff out in small white clouds. Gas lamps flicker to life, casting long shadows across cobblestone alleys, and the sound of carriage wheels rattling on uneven stones echoes against brick walls blackened with soot. You probably won't survive this night, not unless you're tougher than you look. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, why not post in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice as dusk descends is the bite of the air. It creeps through gaps in your ragged coat, gnaws at your fingers, and turns your toes numb inside boots that are more whole than leather. You try rubbing your hands together, but the warmth disappears almost instantly, as if the night itself is swallowing it. Above you, a pale smear of moon is already visible through thick fog. The city isn't silent, not yet, but the noise is shifting. Market cries grow fewer, footsteps echo longer, and the chatter of shopkeepers pulling down shutters blends with the faint, hollow clang of church bells warning that daylight is gone. You trudge along Fleet Street, a place once famous for pamphlets and gossip, now littered with scraps of paper that blow around your ankles. There's a kind of beauty in it, if you squint. Gas lamps, recently installed across much of the city, glow with a halo effect in the mist, almost magical. But you know better. For the homeless, gas lamps are less about romance and more about exposure. Every flicker of light means someone might spot you crouching where you're not supposed to be. A constable's glare or a shopkeeper's broom ready to drive you off. The truth is, London at this hour can feel like two separate worlds. Behind thick windows, you see families gathered around glowing coal fires, laughter spilling out into the night when someone briefly opens a door. Rich, or at least comfortable homes, breathe warmth into the street, and you can smell roast beef, onions frying in butter, and sometimes, if you're really unlucky, the sweetness of a Christmas pudding being steamed. Out here, your stomach tightens painfully at those scents. Inside, there is cheer. Outside, there is frost. The contrast might as well be a brick wall. You pass a newsboy crying out the headlines. Something about Parliament, something about a crime. London has plenty of both. But your eye catches a smaller notice, another cholera case near Whitechapel. Historians still argue whether the disease spread more from foul water or foul air, but you don't need a medical debate. You just know it kills the poor more than the rich. In your world, sickness is a companion, not a mystery. The newsboy's voice fades as you shuffle farther down the street. There's a horse standing by a cart, steam rising from its flanks. You envy it a little, because at least someone bothered to put a blanket over its back. You find yourself wandering toward the flicker of lamplight, reflecting on wet cobblestones, watching shadows grow longer. A group of clerks, hats tilted, overcoats buttoned to the chin, hurry past, eager to catch the omnibus home. One of them glances at you, quickly looks away. That's something you've grown used to, being looked at, but not seen. People don't stare at the homeless in Victorian London, not out of kindness, but because it's easier to pretend you're part of the fog. You pause under an archway to catch your breath, pulling your coat tighter. The stone beneath your back is icy. Someone has chalked a crude drawing on the wall, a little caricature of a politician with a ridiculous nose. You smirk despite yourself. Even now, in the middle of misery, Londoners have their humor. And maybe you do too. You mutter under your breath, "At least I don't have a nose like that." That's your first joke of the evening. Congratulations! You're officially funnier than most of Parliament. But the joke doesn't warm you. You need to keep moving because stopping means freezing. The dampness in the air is as dangerous as the cold itself. Victorian winters weren't always brutal with snow, but the wet chill seeped into bone and lung. You cough once, twice, and the sound echoes down the alley like someone else answering back. You're reminded of the stories about consumption, tuberculosis, that whispered through poor neighborhoods. Some said you could hear the disease before you saw it. Whether true or not, the coughing is everywhere tonight, like a grim choir rehearsing in the distance. Your feet carry you toward a familiar landmark, St. Paul's Cathedral, its dome looming above the city like a ghostly guardian. The bells chime again, slow and deep. It feels almost like they're measuring your footsteps, counting the hours you'll need to survive before morning brings light again. There's a little side street you know near here where beggars gather. You hesitate. Sometimes the company of others means warmth. Sometimes it means trouble. You once heard about a fight breaking out there over nothing more than a crust of bread. One man walked away with it. The other didn't walk away at all. London is like that. Hungry people don't need much reason to become dangerous. A shiver runs through you, and you try to distract yourself with a thought. Did you know Queen Victoria herself once expressed concern over the state of the poor, even as her empire was growing fat on industry? At least, that's what the newspaper said. Whether it was genuine compassion or political theater, historians still argue whether she really cared or whether it was just another performance. You almost laugh again. Imagine the Queen of England tucking into her royal feast while you gnaw on hope and air. Quite the dinner party. The night deepens, the frost thickens, and every shadow seems to move. You imagine for a moment that the fog itself is alive, curling around you like some great beast, patient and silent. Somewhere in the darkness, a church choir is practicing, the sound faint but sweet. It floats through the air, threading into your mind like a lullaby you can't quite reach. For just a heartbeat, you feel calm, and then reality tugs you back. Your stomach growls, your hands tremble, and you remember that you're not listening from the safety of a pew, but from the edge of the street, where the night has no pity. And so, as the first section of your journey closes, you take one last look around at the city as dusk gives way to full night. London is alive, glowing, breathing, steaming, but for you it is also a cold beast, indifferent to your hunger, deaf to your cough, and the long winter night is only just beginning. You keep walking because stopping isn't really an option. The cold presses in with the weight of damp wool, heavy and relentless, and your body knows that if you stand still too long, you'll stiffen like the horses left in the frost. Gas lamps flicker above, their glow soft but steady, humming faintly with the hiss of burning gas. You glance up at one of the lamplighters climbing his iron ladder to snuff or relight a lamp, his face hidden beneath a scarf. For him, this is just a job. For you, the glow he leaves behind feels like a tiny mercy in a world otherwise filled with shadows. You shuffle past the door of an inn, the kind you'll never afford. From inside comes a roar of laughter, followed by the deep chords of a piano hammered out in some cheerful tune. The warmth seeps through the cracks in the door, teasing you. It smells like mulled wine, spiced, sweet, and steaming, and roast goose, the kind that's usually painted in children's Christmas books. You hover there a second too long, like a moth circling glass, but a man steps out, adjusting his top hat, and his glance at you is sharp enough to slice. You duck your head and keep moving. Being homeless in Victorian London isn't just about the cold. It's about being invisible until the moment someone wants you gone. There are firelit taverns on almost every block, each with windows glowing amber. Through one, you catch sight of a table lined with tankards of beer. Men in rough coats laugh, slap each other on the back, and shout about politics you'll never be invited to debate. For the poor, taverns are sometimes an escape, a place where a single penny might buy you a pint and an hour by the fire. But a penny, for you, is a mountain. You think about slipping inside anyway, maybe finding a dark corner where the barkeep won't notice. But then you remember the stories. Many taverns were quick to throw out anyone looking too ragged, too broke, or too obviously homeless. And you've already had your share of bruises from a broom or a boot. Instead, you pause by a small bakery, its shutters half closed. A boy inside is sweeping flour from the floor, whistling softly to himself. The smell makes you weak. Bread, fresh out of the oven, its crust golden and crackling. You watch him for a moment, hoping against reason he might notice you, might take pity, might toss out the scraps that are too stale for customers. Once, you did get lucky like that. An older woman slid you a heel of bread so hard you nearly cracked a tooth, but to you it tasted like heaven. Tonight, the boy never looks up. He sweeps, he whistles, he locks the door. And just like that, the dream of bread disappears. Your feet drag toward the river again, the Thames glittering with a sickly kind of light. At night, the water reflects not just the moon, but the smoke and soot of the city, turning it a murky silver black. Ships creak at their moorings, and dock workers move like shadows along the quay. You pass a man curled up against a bollard, his hat pulled low, his breath rattling. You consider joining him. At least you'd share body heat. But then you remember the lice, the fleas, and the thieves who sometimes sneak up on the sleeping poor to steal what little they have. No, better to stay upright, moving, visible enough to not be mistaken for a corpse. Your stomach twists again. Hunger has its own way of warming you, feverish, almost dizzying. You imagine food so vividly that your mouth waters, a bowl of stew, thick with carrots and mutton, a wedge of cheese, sharp and salty, even porridge, the kind served at charity halls, lumpy and bland. Did you know that during the Victorian period, Londoners often relied on something called peas pudding? It was mashed peas boiled into a thick paste, cheap, filling, and as exciting as wallpaper paste. Quirky tidbit. Street vendors sometimes sang little jingles about peas pudding, hoping the rhyme would make it sound more appealing. You hum a few nonsense bars yourself, just to feel less alone. The sound bounces back to you off the river wall, like the city itself is mocking your tune. And then As you pass under a bridge arch, the wind shifts and you feel it. Heat. Not much, but enough. A ragged man has managed to build a tiny fire from scraps of wood, burning so low it looks like embers more than flames. 3 others crouch around it, their faces hollow-eyed, hands stretched out like claws. For a moment, you consider joining them, but then one of the men looks up, his expression hard, guarded. In a world where food is scarce, even fire becomes property. You move on, shivering. The reality is that warmth is a commodity, as valuable as gold. Coal costs money, wood costs money, and you? You don't have either. You pass by a coal cart where black dust has spilled onto the street, and for a moment you crouch down, sifting through the mess. A small lump catches your eye, perfectly burnable, though tiny. You slip it into your pocket as if it were treasure. You might not even get to use it, but just having it makes you feel as though you won some kind of battle against the night. A constable marches past, his boots sharp on the stones. You tense, your body instinctively shrinking into the shadows. The police in Victorian London weren't always gentle with the homeless. They had orders to keep the streets clean, which often meant moving you along, sometimes with a shove, sometimes with a night in jail. A night in jail, you reflect, might not be the worst thing. At least there'd be a roof. But then again, you've heard about the lice, the overcrowding, the stink. No, you'll take your chances outside, where at least the sky is above you, and no one locks the door. You find yourself drifting into a small square where a few carriages are still rolling through. Wealthier Londoners wrapped in furs lean back in their seats, oblivious to the way their horses splash mud onto the poor huddled by the curbs. One boy runs alongside a carriage, begging for a coin. The passenger ignores him, pulling the curtain closed. The boy drops back, shoulders slumping, then shoots you a quick look. There's no judgment in it, just recognition. The two of you are cut from the same cloth, part of the city, but not of its society. And so the night deepens, and you continue searching for a corner where warmth might exist. Not comfort, not safety, but simply the absence of cold. That's your measure of survival now. Not roast goose, not mulled wine, not even bread. Just warmth, fleeting, fragile, enough to keep your heart beating until the next lamp flickers out. The sounds of the city shift again as night thickens, and the cheerful noise of vendors, the calls of roasted chestnuts, hot chestnuts, or penny pies, fades into memory. Earlier, when the sun still clung stubbornly to the horizon, the streets were full of their cries. They used to be a kind of soundtrack to winter in London, each cellar with a rhythm of words, almost like a tune. Now the cries are gone, leaving behind a strange emptiness. The streets feel quieter, colder, as if even sound has chosen to retreat indoors where the fires are. You remember the last chestnut you managed to buy, or rather beg. It was charred on one side, half raw on the other, but you ate it anyway, burning your tongue a little. The taste lingers now, ghost-like, as though your mind is taunting you with the memory of warmth. You glance at a blackened little stand pushed against a wall, its pan of ashes abandoned. Somewhere in the ashes, maybe, lies a chestnut someone dropped, but the thought of digging with bare fingers through soot and filth makes you hesitate. Hunger, though, has a way of lowering standards. You crouch, scrape through the ash, and, miracle of miracles, you find half of one. It's cold, gritty, but you pop it into your mouth before you can think better of it. Congratulations! Tonight, you're eating leftovers from a stranger's fire. If this isn't fine dining, what is? The city at dusk is a shifting stage, and vendors were always the chorus. Without them, you notice more of the smaller noises, a dog barking, a rat scurrying, the clatter of a cartwheel on a loose cobblestone. The quiet sharpens your awareness of just how empty your hands are. When the stalls close, your chance of scraps disappears with them. For the well-off, vendors meant convenience. For you, they meant survival. You wander past a corner where a pie seller once stood. His voice carried down the block, promising hot eel pies for a penny. You wrinkle your nose at the memory. Eel pies were cheap and filling, but let's be honest, they smelled like something fished out of a ditch. Still, you would eat one right now if it landed in your lap. Victorian street food had its charms. Meat puddings, fried fish, whelks. But it was also notorious for cutting corners. Some sellers padded pies with sawdust or mashed potato skins, passing them off as meat. Historians still argue whether such stories were exaggerated slander or grim fact. You lean toward believing them. After all, when money's tight, honesty tends to shrink faster than daylight in December. As you shuffle down Ludgate Hill, you notice another abandoned cart, this one once selling roasted potatoes. A sweet, earthy scent lingers in the air, and your imagination betrays you again. You can almost taste the crackling skin, the soft, steaming flesh inside. You chuckle dryly to yourself because your body is now like a cruel advertising agency, running food commercials nonstop with no option to skip. That's joke number one tonight. Your stomach as London's loudest marketing firm. The streets grow darker, quieter still. You think about how vendors themselves lived. Many weren't far from your condition, selling by day, sleeping rough by night, caught in the same cycle of desperation. Some had licenses, others were chased off by police for blocking traffic. You once saw a chestnut seller shoved by a constable so hard he tumbled into his own pan, scattering nuts everywhere. The officer laughed. You didn't. You drift closer to Covent Garden, where earlier in the day costermongers shouted about their apples, pears, or turnips. Now the market is silent, its stalls empty, except for the occasional leaf of cabbage curling in the wind. You dart forward and snatch one, chewing quickly, even though it tastes like nothing. That's dinner, apparently, a leaf of cold cabbage. You're a true gourmand tonight. Joke number two. Gordon Ramsay would have a heart attack if he saw your menu. The truth is, hunger sharpens your senses. You start noticing crumbs where you never did before. A crust dropped in the gutter, a scrap of paper still greasy from holding fried fish. You crouch, scrape what you can with a finger, and lick the salt off. For a second, you close your eyes and let the flavor bloom. It's just salt, but in this moment, it might as well be a banquet. Victorian London was full of these contrasts. Glittering banquets for some, gutter feasts for others. Did you know that Queen Victoria herself loved roasted beef and potatoes so much that menus at Buckingham often repeated them week after week? A quirky tidbit. She was once teased for her fondness for plain food, even as her guests were drowning in sauces and French dishes. Meanwhile, on the same streets, children fought over a crust like dogs. It's a strange thought, how one city could contain both hunger and excess, so close together, yet never touching. Your stomach growls again, louder this time, and you press a hand against it as if to shush it. A group of well-dressed ladies passes by, parasols tucked under their arms despite the night, and you hear one whisper to the other about those poor creatures on the street. They mean you. You duck your head, cheeks burning, not just from the cold, but from shame. Being hungry is bad enough. Being pitied while you're hungry is worse. And still, the absence of vendors leaves a void, not just in your stomach, but in the rhythm of the streets. The night feels quieter, emptier, almost like a stage after the actors have walked off, leaving only the props. You can't help but think about tomorrow, when the stalls will open again, when the cries will rise into the air like a kind of chorus, and maybe, just maybe, you'll find a way to snag something before it's gone. Tonight, though, the curtain has fallen, and all that's left is the silence of your hunger. You keep moving, because the night isn't done with you yet. And neither is your stomach. The riverbank calls you again, a familiar refuge in the vast, unwelcoming city. The Thames stretches out, dark and glimmering with the dim reflection of gas lamps along the quay. Mist hovers low over the water, curling around the piers like ghostly fingers. You trudge along the edge, your boots sinking slightly into the slushy muck, and notice clusters of people huddled beneath bridges and arches. The architecture itself becomes shelter, stone and iron bending the wind around your body in tiny pockets of relative warmth. You find a small group near a collapsed boat hull. They've managed to rig up something resembling a fire from scraps of driftwood and paper. The flames are weak, orange wraiths dancing against the black backdrop of the river. You inch closer, hoping there's room without offending anyone. One man shakes his head, but gestures for you to come nearer. Shared warmth is a small mercy. You settle down, pressing hands toward the heat, and feel the chill in your fingers start to retreat. Just a little. The people around you are a mixed lot. There's an old man with a soot-streaked face, a boy with bare toes poking through worn boots, and a woman with a shawl wrapped around her head that's seen better decades. You notice the way they all stare at the fire, silent, lost in thought. Some hum quietly, others cough. Influenza has been making rounds this season, and every ragged cough is a reminder that the riverbank is no sanctuary from illness. Historians still argue whether urban overcrowding or lack of hygiene contributed more to Victorian epidemics, but you don't need academic debate to know sickness is everywhere tonight. You shift, trying to make room on the wet, uneven ground. The cold seeps through your clothing and into your bones. You think about the smell. The Thames at winter is a pungent mix of decay, smoke, and coal dust, something that seems almost alive as it curls around your nostrils. You wrinkle your nose, but oddly enough, it's comforting. It smells like home to anyone who has made the streets their bed, like a reminder that you're not alone in this harshness. A child approaches, no older than 9 or 10, carrying a tin cup. You realize she's scavenging for coins, and she offers you a piece of stale bread she's saved from someone else. You accept it with a nod, chewing slowly. Hunger makes the simplest offerings taste like luxury. You remember reading somewhere that child beggars were a common sight in London, their nimbleness and cunning making them both charming and infuriating to adults. A quirky tidbit. Some children would masquerade as sick to draw sympathy, pretending coughs or limp limbs only to scam coins for sugar or scraps. The river sounds are hypnotic. Water laps against the pilings, and somewhere upstream a barge creaks as its cargo shifts. You watch the reflection of lamplight in the rippling water, feeling a strange serenity despite the misery around you. The shadows of the bridges above create moving patterns, almost like silent spectators leaning over to watch your makeshift encampment. You shiver, part from the cold and part from the eerie feeling that the city itself is observing. You notice a couple of men rolling barrels along the quay, crates balanced on shoulders. The labor is relentless. Their breath forms tiny clouds in the icy air. They give you little notice, as though your presence is irrelevant. The streets and riverbanks of London are a continuous performance of survival, each person playing a role that might vanish in a blink. The constable's patrols will soon pass by, chasing away anyone without a roof over their head. You tuck your chin into your collar, pretending to be part of the shadows. Food is the constant obsession here. A discarded fish bone, a soggy loaf of bread, a peel from a discarded apple. They are treasures. You pick up a small piece of stale bread from the ground, grateful for it, and gnaw slowly. The taste is bland, but it quiets the roar in your stomach, if only for a few minutes. Nearby, someone has boiled water in a battered pot, the steam rising in thin curls. You consider asking for a sip, but the wary eyes of others remind you that trust is rare and precious here. Across the water, the factories are alive with glowing windows and smokestacks belching steam. You can hear the distant rhythm of machinery, a lullaby of industry that fills the otherwise silent night. Some say the hum of production is comforting, a reminder that life continues, while others argue it's oppressive, a mechanical heartbeat that drowns out hope. Historians still argue whether industrial expansion improved lives for the poor or only worsened their suffering. You think the answer depends on which side of the riverbank you're standing. As you huddle, you notice the patterns of survival. Men and women sharing scraps, children collecting driftwood for tiny fires, bodies pressed together for heat. There's a system, almost unspoken, a rhythm learned over years of necessity. You recall a quirky fact. Some people in the 19th century used cardboard and old barrels as makeshift beds along the embankment, insulating themselves just enough to survive the night. You smile at the ingenuity, its human spirit fighting back against the frost. And yet, danger never sleeps. Rats scurry beneath the wooden piers, eyes glinting like pins in the dark. The river smells foul, carrying waste and debris, and every misstep risks a cold plunge into the icy Thames. You glance at your companions, sharing a quiet nod. No one speaks much. Words are expensive when your body and mind are already taxed by survival. You sip some water from your flask, grateful that it's not frozen yet, and watch the shadows. By now, your fingers are warming just enough to regain a semblance of control. The warmth from the fire spreads slowly, tiny pulses of relief traveling up your arms. For the moment, you can almost forget the chill in your toes, the ache in your back, the gnawing hunger. You are a part of this landscape, a shadow among shadows, and for a few fleeting minutes, the Thames has become a sanctuary instead of a threat. The night is far from over, but you allow yourself a quiet, fleeting sense of peace. The cold is still there, the hunger still gnaws, the darkness still presses. But by this riverbank, in the company of strangers who are also survivors, you feel just a little less alone. Eventually, the reality of the workhouse creeps back into your mind like an unwelcome shadow. You've walked past the looming brick structure countless times, its barred windows glowing dimly with light. Inside, the promise of warmth and a bed exists, but it comes with chains of a different kind. You weigh the misery of the workhouse against the misery of the streets. For some, the choice is clear: hunger and frost over the rigid schedules, harsh punishments, and constant labor required of those seeking shelter. For others, the workhouse is a necessary evil. Historians still argue whether workhouses genuinely improved poor relief or simply institutionalized suffering. And standing here, you feel the debate pressing on your own ribs. You wander closer to the main gate, noting the signs that declare rules in bold black letters: no loitering, no complaints accepted, entry by permission only. The words seem carved not just into wood, but into the air itself, a reminder that poverty is regulated, observed, and controlled. A woman emerges, carrying a child with a scarf tied crookedly around his neck. Her expression is a mixture of exhaustion and defiance, as if she has already lost the battle but is determined to show up anyway. Inside the workhouse, her life will be regimented, meals portioned, and labor demanded. Outside, she faces the night, the Thames, and the unpredictable kindness of strangers. The workhouse kitchens would have been a place of monotony: bowls of gruel, thin soup, bread that barely nourishes. You think of the gruel stirring in its metal cauldron, and you gag slightly. But the alternative is lying on the cold stone outside, wrapped in rags, wondering if frostbite will steal your toes before dawn. There's no right choice. You shuffle on, weighing the odds. Did you know that Victorian workhouses sometimes required inmates to wear uniforms that made them look identical? It was a clever, if demoralizing, way to strip individuality, a fringe tactic of control. Your stomach twists again, reminding you why you even considered the workhouse in the first place. Hunger isn't a polite whisper. It's a sharp, insistent reminder that your survival depends on constant motion, constant vigilance, constant ingenuity. You rub your hands together, pretending for a moment that friction can replace warmth. You glance at a puddle reflecting the flickering lamplight and think of the stories told in hushed corners of the city. Tales of those who traded workhouse rations for scraps on the street, who escaped chains for the freedom to shiver on their own terms. The decision isn't only about physical comfort. Workhouses carry a social stigma heavier than any winter coat. Neighbors whisper, children snicker, and you become one of those people, an identity imposed from above. Your pride bristles against the idea of surrendering it for a bed. Yet, hunger is persuasive. The cold is persuasive. The thought of stretching stiff muscles and soaking bones on a wooden plank is persuasive. You remember a quirky Victorian workaround. Some desperate individuals would sneak out at night, pilfer scraps from the kitchens, and return before morning. Survival often required bending the rules, even under the strict eyes of the authorities. The streets themselves offer their own form of autonomy. Here, you choose where to walk, where to crouch, how to blend into the fog. You've memorized every alleyway that shields you from patrolling constables. You know which taverns will ignore a hungry face and which shops will brandish brooms at intruders. The freedom is fragile, yes, but it exists. And tonight, you feel it pulsing beneath your ribs, Workhouses, in contrast, offer security with invisible handcuffs, warmth, and sustenance, but the price of surrendering independence. You pause under a flickering lamplight and survey the scene. The workhouse looms behind you unyielding. The river beckons in the distance, offering only the cold and the company of fellow wanderers. Each option carries a weight, each choice a cost. The decision is personal, intimate, and terrifyingly immediate. You shift your stance, trying to ignore the ache in your knees from crouching under bridges and the sharp bite of the wind against your face. Hunger gnaws, frost bites, and the debate inside you rages quietly. Then, as if on cue, the sound of approaching footsteps reminds you why independence matters. A constable moves down the street, baton ready, eyes scanning for anyone he can push along, anyone without papers, anyone out of place. You shrink into shadow, heart hammering. He passes without noticing you, but the adrenaline lingers, making you aware of the stakes. Freedom on the streets is perilous, but at least it's yours. Inside, even the simplest act, choosing to stretch a stiff limb or stay still, would require permission. And so you make your choice, silent but resolute. Tonight, you will survive outside, on your terms, in the cold. Hunger, frost, and danger are companions you know how to navigate. The workhouse waits, a looming presence of structured misery, but you step past it, your feet carrying you further into the misty streets, toward bridges, alleys, and firelit patches of shadow that offer fleeting warmth. Pride, independence, and the raw need to survive guide you forward, one shivering step at a time. You arrive at the soup kitchen, a thin wisp of smoke curling from its chimney like a silent invitation. Tonight, the line is long but manageable, a shifting queue of ragged coats and hopeful eyes. The smell of broth hits your nose before you even reach the doorway, a thin, watery concoction. But warmth and sustenance come in any form when the cold is gnawing at your bones. You shuffle forward, shoulders hunched, hoping your tattered coat doesn't attract the wrong kind of attention. Hunger makes you bold in a quiet way, though you keep your head down, counting the steps between yourself and that steaming pot. Inside, the kitchen is a controlled chaos. Steam rises from the cauldrons, fogging the air and blurring the faces of the other patrons. Children squeeze past you, their eyes wide, hands stretched, asking for just a sip or a scrap. You catch a glimpse of a boy no older than 7 trying to lift a spoon that's almost as big as his hand. You smile, almost involuntarily, because the scene is both tragic and strangely endearing. Historians still argue whether soup kitchens were more effective in actually reducing hunger or just providing temporary relief. But, in this moment, the effect is real. You take your turn at the counter, bowing slightly as the volunteer ladles the thin broth into your tin bowl. The liquid is more water than substance, but heat radiates from it, creeping into your cold fingers. You blow gently on the surface, trying not to scald yourself, then take a careful sip. The warmth is like a tiny miracle. Around you, whispers float. A man advising a boy on how to stretch his portion, a woman counting spoons for her children. Everyone here shares an unspoken understanding. This is survival, not a social gathering. Scraps of conversation drift in. Someone mentions a recent donation from a local charity, though you know that contributions are erratic, often dependent on the whims of wealthier citizens. A quirky tidbit. Some benefactors like to leave riddles or moral lessons alongside their gifts, expecting gratitude in verse from the poor. You chuckle softly to yourself. The absurdity is oddly comforting. Even generosity in Victorian London comes with strings or instructions. The hunger gnaws while you eat. You've learned to savor each mouthful, to chew slowly, extracting every ounce of nourishment possible. One mouthful of broth, and your body reacts like a long, dry sponge soaking in rain. You notice the other patrons, men whose hands tremble from both cold and fatigue, women keeping their children close, and elderly figures whose eyes reflect years of hardship. You take mental notes, remembering each face, each small gesture of camaraderie or subtle defiance. The atmosphere is almost cozy compared to the streets. Yet, beneath the heat and murmur, the reality of scarcity pulses. Someone near you whispers about the rumor of a shipment of bread delayed due to icy roads. The voice trembles with hope and fear. You can relate. Even a day's delay means cold nights and empty stomachs. You remember reading that in some parts of London, queues at soup kitchens could stretch for hours, sometimes ending without a single portion for the last few in line. A cruel lottery of survival. You glance around for distractions. A woman is feeding her child, careful to give him the larger piece despite her own hunger. Children playfully jab each other with spoons, careful not to spill precious broth. There's a rhythm here, lining up, receiving, eating, retreating. It's monotonous but life-affirming, a fragile routine that sustains not just the body, but some sense of dignity. The cold outside seems distant here, a memory rather than a threat. Steam swirls in front of the small windows, and the laughter of a child almost convinces you the world isn't cruel tonight. Still, your eyes flick to the doorway. The streets are waiting for you, dark and unsympathetic, and soon you'll have to return to them. But for now, the soup kitchen is a pocket of warmth, a fragile island of relief in an otherwise merciless night. You eat slowly, savoring every drop of broth, every crumb of bread that might be passed to you. Your stomach calms, your fingers regain some warmth, and your mind, for the first time tonight, feels a hint of peace. This is why people return night after night, not just for food, but for the temporary reprieve, the brief reclaiming of humanity, in a city that often seems to strip it away. And as you stand to leave, tin bowl now empty, you feel that familiar tension of re-entering the streets. Hunger is only temporarily sated. The frost waits. But at least tonight, you've traded the pangs for warmth and fleeting comfort. That small victory matters more than you let on. You step back onto the street, the heat of the soup kitchen fading almost instantly as the cold London air wraps around you again. Every breath sends little puffs of fog into the dim glow of gas lamps, and you feel your muscles tighten as if reminding you that warmth is fleeting. The streets are quieter now, but not empty. You catch the distant clop of horse hooves and the occasional shout, reminders that the city never truly sleeps. And yet, there's a difference between being seen in the cold and being noticed. You move through shadows deliberately, aware that constables patrol these areas, scanning for anyone they consider undesirable. You pause, letting your eyes adjust to the dark, and notice a constable rounding the corner, baton in hand. Their presence is a subtle threat, and your body tenses reflexively. You've learned the street's rhythms, the time of night when patrols are heavy, the alleys where you can disappear, the benches that offer a brief reprieve. The constable passes by without spotting you, and you exhale slowly, a mixture of relief and lingering fear. Being visible in Victorian London could mean danger. Being invisible could mean safety. Sometimes the line between the two is thinner than a cobblestone crack. Police enforcement wasn't just about law. It was about maintaining appearances. Sweepers moved along alleyways, shooing away the poor, and workhouses depended on the constant threat of authority to keep the undesirables in line. Historians still argue whether this approach reduced crime or simply pushed the problem into the shadows. But for you, it is very simple. Get caught, and your night becomes infinitely harder. You move cautiously, sticking to the shadows, the dim light reflecting off wet stones, illuminating your path just enough. A group of men sits huddled near a stairwell, wrapped in whatever scraps of fabric they could find. You nod at one, who nods back, an unspoken acknowledgement that you're part of the same nocturnal order. In this city, eye contact can be a form of currency. Too much trust can cost you. Too little can make you invisible even when you need recognition. You shuffle past, careful to make no sudden movements that might attract attention, careful not to draw the eyes of anyone who wields authority. You pass a doorway where someone has created a small makeshift bed from cardboard and old coats. It's neat, almost domestic in its arrangement, and you pause to admire the ingenuity. Some of your companions on the street spend as much time crafting their small shelters as others spend arranging furniture at home. Quirky tidbit. In particularly harsh winters, some people would line their cardboard beds with straw stolen from markets or warehouses, insulating themselves enough to survive longer nights. You smirk at the thought. Engineers of survival in a city that rarely offers mercy. Footsteps echo behind you. You glance back, and a ragged child scurries along, carrying a scrap of newspaper to shield against the wind. The child dodges puddles with skillful precision, a streetwise agility you've come to expect. Children in Victorian London often had to fend for themselves from an early age, sometimes forming gangs to protect one another. A historian might debate the morality of these street communities, but for you, they are a reminder that survival often requires cunning more than courage alone. The cold gnaws at your extremities again, and you pull your coat tighter. Hands stiff, your breath shallow and visible in the lamplight, you consider how little room there is for error. One slip, one misjudgment, and frostbite or police intervention could turn a night from bearable to catastrophic. And yet, there's something rhythmically reassuring about moving with the streets, learning their hidden passages, watching the flow of life and shadows intertwine. As you continue, the lamplight catches the glint of something in the gutter, a small coin, a tin scrap, a morsel of bread, perhaps, dropped by someone too careless or too drunk to notice. You stoop, and fingers numb, retrieve it. It's a small victory, a reminder that the streets, though ruthless, can offer unexpected rewards. This scavenging is a delicate dance. Observe, approach, act quickly, and retreat. Even the smallest item becomes treasure in a world where scarcity is constant. The night stretches on, but your awareness remains sharp. Every alleyway offers opportunity and threat in equal measure. You notice the familiar patterns, shadows shifting near doorways, the subtle steam rising from drains, the rhythmic footfalls of workers heading home from late shifts. These details are your lifelines. Miss them, and you risk exposure or accident. You catch a whiff of coal smoke, and for a second, imagine the warmth of a home fireplace. A fantasy almost cruel in its contrast to your reality. A tavern door creaks and laughter spills out. You consider slipping inside for warmth, but you remember past experiences. Staff often chased away anyone who looked too ragged, and patrons weren't always charitable. Still, the thought lingers. Quirky tidbit. Some desperate souls would feign drunkenness or pretend to be invisible in corners just to catch fleeting warmth, practicing a kind of street theater that might earn them a seat, or at least a glance. You shake your head, smiling at the absurdity, and move on. Shadows swallowing your figure. And so the streets continue their nighttime performance. Patrols pass, shadows deepen, and you navigate each step with practiced care. The cold remains, the hunger simmers, and the city hums with unseen life. But your awareness, your vigilance, and your adaptability keep you alive. In the dance between authority and survival, every careful movement, every decision to pause or pass becomes a testament to resilience in a city that seldom offers it freely. You keep moving, drawn to the familiar patterns of makeshift shelters tucked into alleys, doorways, and stairwells. The night air bites at your exposed skin, and every step is measured, calculated, like a silent negotiation with the city itself. Cardboard, discarded barrels, and tattered blankets have become the building blocks of survival here. You squeeze into a narrow doorway, pressing yourself against the damp stone, and immediately sense the small community already gathered there. Faces peeking from layers of clothing, eyes alert for danger or opportunity. Bodies are pressed together for warmth. You learn quickly how to position yourself. Shoulders against a wall, legs tucked beneath a coat, hands cupped around your knees. The cold is relentless, but the company, even if silent, provides a flicker of solace. One man murmurs to himself, recounting the day's minor victories. A scrap of bread here, a small fire there. You nod in acknowledgement, offering no words, because here, gestures are currency. Quirky tidbit. Some individuals line their makeshift beds with old newspapers, hoping the ink would repel dampness and add a tiny layer of insulation. Ingenious, if slightly odorous. The night is alive with small noises. Rats scuttle across the cobblestones, and you've learned to anticipate their sudden appearances. A stray dog growls from a corner, and you adjust your position to avoid an encounter that could cost you warmth or scraps. The nearby sound of a cart rolling along the street reminds you of the world outside this tiny microcosm. A city indifferent to your suffering, bustling with those who are asleep, working, or simply ignoring your existence. Historians still argue whether the urban poor were better off forming these small street families, or whether such arrangements increased exposure to theft, disease, and violence. From where you sit, it's both protection and peril. A woman tucks her child closer, murmuring softly to calm his shivering. You remember seeing similar scenes along the Thames, where mothers shielded their children with layers of fabric, shared scraps of food, and whispered comforting nonsense even as the world outside was anything but kind. You wonder how many stories like hers have gone untold, erased by the cold and the fog. You think of a fringe claim you once overheard at a tavern, that some homeless mothers would secretly barter their warmth or meals to strangers in exchange for protection. The thought makes you grimace, yet you understand. The streets demand trade-offs. The shelter is crowded, but there's a rhythm to it. Each person knows their place, each movement cautious, deliberate. Someone passes a tiny flame along a line of hands, letting it warm fingers that have gone numb from the frost. The smoke curls lazily upward, mingling with the damp air, creating an almost ethereal haze. You breathe it in, letting the warmth linger on your skin, a reminder that ingenuity can counter the elements, at least for a little while. You notice a young boy fiddling with a scrap of wood, fashioning it into something like a toy. A smile tugs at your lips despite the misery. In a world stripped of luxury, humans still find ways to play, to imagine, to carve out moments of normalcy. Quirky tidbit. Some Victorian street children would use leftover scraps of rope, wood, or tin to create miniature games or tools, a testament to resourcefulness that belies their age. The resilience is remarkable. The smell of damp fabric, coal smoke, and human bodies is overwhelming, yet oddly comforting. It's the scent of survival, of a community stitched together from necessity rather than choice. You press yourself closer to the fire, savoring the small victory of shared warmth, knowing it will only last a few hours before the frost creeps back in. You catch snippets of whispered conversation, plans for the next day, advice on which alleyways are safest, murmurs about where the next meal might come from. Knowledge, you realize, is as valuable as coal or bread in this life. The night stretches and the cold deepens, but the shelter holds. You learn the small joys, a shared blanket, a hand extended for warmth, the muted laughter of a child who has momentarily forgotten hunger. You allow yourself a brief sense of comfort, even as the city beyond continues its indifferent hum. Survival isn't about luxury. It's about finding and preserving these fleeting pockets of humanity in the midst of relentless hardship. By the time the fire begins to die down, your body is still stiff, but you've reclaimed some strength. Your mind quiets, focusing on the rhythms of the small community around you. You remind yourself that tomorrow will bring more frost, more hunger, and more streets to navigate. But for tonight, this fragile corner of London is yours, a temporary sanctuary against the relentless winter. You rise from the makeshift shelter, the warmth lingering only faintly on your skin. The streets beyond beckon again, silent and icy, a maze of shadowed alleys and gas-lit corners. You trudge along, careful to avoid puddles that freeze over like glass in the moonlight, and your breath forms soft clouds that dissipate before reaching the cobblestones. Each step is deliberate. One misstep could mean slipping, falling, or drawing attention to yourself in a city that rarely looks kindly on the homeless. Alongside the river, you notice the flicker of another fire, smaller and weaker than the ones before. Two men sit huddled around it, exchanging whispered stories. One of them tosses a small scrap of paper into the flames, a note, or perhaps a list of some sort. The other man shakes his head, murmuring something you can't hear. Historians still argue whether informal communication networks among the homeless help them survive or expose them to greater danger. You take a cautious step closer, curious but mindful, and are met with a guarded glance. You nod respectfully and retreat, understanding that trust is a rare commodity in the shadows of Victorian London. The wind gusts, cutting through your layers and biting at your face. You pull your scarf tighter and keep moving, guided by memory and instinct. Street lights illuminate patches of the sidewalk, revealing occasional coins, crumbs, and the detritus of city life that others have carelessly discarded. Each piece is a potential lifeline. A penny, a scrap of bread, or even a fragment of cloth that could add another layer of warmth. Your fingers, now numb, brush against something cold and metallic, a small coin, forgotten or dropped. You pocket it with gratitude, a small triumph in a night otherwise dominated by scarcity. Ahead, a doorway opens slightly, revealing a faint glow from inside. Someone sleeps there, and the warmth radiates outward in a subtle halo. You hesitate. There's no one to challenge you here, but you know better than to intrude. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Some homeless Londoners would slip partially into doorways, tucking their legs into the threshold while leaving the rest of their bodies outside. An artful compromise between comfort and stealth. You smile at the ingenuity, imagining the city as a puzzle of invisible beds and borrowed warmth. The streets seem alive with secrets tonight. You pass a narrow alley where someone has stacked empty crates into a makeshift fort. A child peers out, eyes wide and wary, perhaps imagining a world far removed from the harsh reality. Around you, the city breathes in muted gasps, the drip of melting snow from rooftops, the distant clatter of a cart, the occasional shout from a tavern. The ambient noise is hypnotic, reminding you that even in suffering, life persists. Hunger tugs insistently at your stomach again. You scan the street, spotting the faint glow of another soup kitchen's lamp. The line has thinned since earlier, leaving only a handful of figures waiting. You approach cautiously, aware that patience and timing are essential. The volunteer ladles soup into bowls with practiced precision, and your turn arrives. The warmth of the broth hits immediately, a balm against both cold and fatigue. You sip slowly, savoring each swallow, letting it remind you that small victories matter in the harsh calculus of survival. Beyond the food, there's a sense of rhythm to the night. You recognize faces from earlier, nodding quietly in acknowledgement, and notice others settling into alleys, huddled fires, or doorways. Quirky tidbit. Some homeless Londoners would carry small tokens, buttons, scraps of fabric, even pebbles, as markers of territory or makeshift currency within their communities. It's a subtle, almost invisible social code, a way to navigate the city's shadows without verbal confrontation. You leave the soup kitchen, warmth still lingering in your belly, and move toward the bridge. The Thames glimmers under the lamplight, fog rising in delicate ribbons from the surface. You pause, watching a barge glide silently downstream, its cargo silhouetted against the night. The river is both ally and adversary, offering resources and danger in equal measure. Rats scurry along the banks, and you steer clear, remembering past encounters that left nothing but bruises and frustration. The city, in these hours, is a study in contrasts. Wealth and poverty coexist in stark proximity. A carriage passes, muffled laughter spilling into the air, while a child sleeps curled on a doorstep a few yards away. You remind yourself that survival is a negotiation with reality, a balance between resourcefulness, caution, and courage. Every alley, every shadow, every flicker of light offers an opportunity or a threat. Historians still argue whether the urban poor thrive due to ingenuity or sheer stubbornness. From your vantage point tonight, it feels like a bit of both. And so, you continue walking, stomach full for now, eyes sharp, body alert. Each step carries the weight of experience, the lessons of previous nights etched into your bones. You navigate the streets like a shadow, aware of every whisper, every creak, every flicker of lamplight. The night stretches before you, long and uncertain, yet somehow navigable. In the interplay of darkness and light, hunger and warmth, threat and sanctuary, you find the rhythm of survival, the subtle art of being present, invisible, and alive in Victorian London. You round a familiar corner, and the smell of coal smoke mingled with damp earth fills your nose. The alley opens onto a small courtyard where several figures have gathered, clustered around tiny fires made from broken crates and discarded wood. The glow casts flickering shadows across the stone walls, and you pause, taking in the scene. There's a strange beauty here if you squint past the obvious misery. Humans, resilient and inventive, carving out warmth and camaraderie in a city that rarely offers either. You join the group cautiously, settling near a fire. The heat is a relief, creeping into your stiff fingers and aching joints. One man nods at you, acknowledging your presence without words. A silent agreement that you belong, at least for tonight. Children sit close to mothers, wrapped in shawls and blankets, their wide eyes reflecting both curiosity and fear. Quirky tidbit. Some families would layer old newspapers and straw beneath children's clothing to create makeshift insulation, a clever and often overlooked survival tactic. The ingenuity is humble but effective, a testament to human adaptability. Hunger tugs again, and you reach for a small scrap of bread you've been saving, gnawing at it slowly. Each bite is deliberate, a quiet celebration of sustenance. Around the courtyard, you notice small rituals. A man stirring a pot of watery stew, someone tossing another log onto a fire, whispered instructions passed to children about where to move safely if a patrol passes. These routines are essential, providing a semblance of order amidst chaos. Historians still argue whether these informal communities offer genuine protection or merely concentrated vulnerability. But from where you sit, they feel like lifelines. The night carries on with quiet murmurs, interrupted by occasional laughter or coughs. You observe the interactions carefully, noting the ways people share scraps, manage the fire, and signal each other about approaching dangers. There's a rhythm here, an unspoken code that governs behavior. One woman passes around a tin cup of thin broth, nodding at each person before returning it to the pot. Generosity, even in scarcity, binds these fragile communities together. You glance up at the darkened sky. The moon is a sliver, barely illuminating the courtyard, and the fog curling along the riverbanks creates an otherworldly glow. The city is transformed at night, familiar streets becoming labyrinths of shadow and light. You move cautiously toward a quieter corner, seeking a slightly more secluded spot for rest. Your body aches, muscles stiff from hours of crouching and walking, yet the small victories, food, warmth, companionship, keep your spirit tethered to this fragile hope. A stray dog pads through the courtyard, sniffing at discarded scraps. The children giggle quietly, keeping their distance, and the adults nod to each other. Animals are both companions and competitors on the streets, and you've learned to coexist cautiously. Quirky tidbit. Some homeless Londoners would keep small animals around, not just for companionship, but also for scavenging assistance. Rats, dogs, and even cats helped locate food or warned of approaching danger. The interplay of survival strategies extends beyond humans. The city is a shared ecosystem of necessity. The cold presses harder now, seeping through layers of clothing and cloth. You huddle closer to the fire, hands extended, savoring the fleeting warmth. Stories circulate in hushed tones of past nights, narrowly avoided danger, or unusual kindnesses from strangers. You remember one tale about a baker who secretly left unsold bread at the edges of his shop for those too afraid to enter. Historians still argue whether such acts were widespread or exceptional, but the story lingers as a reminder that kindness exists, even if it is rare. Time seems to slow in these moments. Each minute carries the weight of anticipation. The approach of patrols, the dwindling of firewood, the whispers of children tucked against their mothers. You focus on breathing steadily, preserving warmth, and conserving energy. Every action is deliberate. You know that survival is not only physical, but mental. The ability to remain calm, alert, and resourceful in a city that offers constant threats. A sudden clatter makes you flinch. Someone drops a pot, the metallic sound echoing through the courtyard. A hush falls. You wait, muscles tense, until the figure mutters an apology and the rhythm resumes. Nights like these teach patience and resilience. Every small disruption is a test, every fleeting comfort a fragile victory. By the time the fire dwindles to embers, your body is still cold, but the sense of community, however transient, warms you in a deeper, quieter way. You stretch your limbs carefully, noting the stiffness that will greet you in the morning, and prepare for a few hours of fitful sleep. The city, indifferent yet alive, surrounds you with shadows, noises, and distant lights. A constant reminder that survival is never guaranteed, but determination and adaptability offer a fighting chance. The first hours of the night blur into a rhythm of cautious movement and quiet observation. You leave the courtyard, stepping lightly over frozen puddles that glint like black glass under the lamplight. Your breath comes in puffs, visible in the air, and your ears strain for distant sounds. The clatter of a cart, the low murmur of voices, the occasional shout carried on the wind. Every sound is a signal, a warning, a reminder that the streets are alive and unpredictable. You walk with care, aware that a single misstep, literal or figurative, could compromise your safety. A row of shuttered shops lines the street, their windows dusty, cracked, and reflecting the dim gaslight. You glance at one, noticing a half-eaten loaf left near the threshold. Hunger tugs again, and you retrieve it carefully, mindful of any approaching figures. The loaf is dry, crusty, and probably weeks old, but it is sustenance nonetheless. Quirky tidbit. Some homeless Londoners developed an almost instinctual ability to detect even faint traces of edible leftovers, a skill honed through necessity and repeated practice. You smile wryly at your own proficiency. You've become a connoisseur of scraps, a scavenger in a city full of hidden bounty. As you navigate deeper into the night, the sounds of industry fade, replaced by a subtle symphony of street life. Dripping water from rooftops, scuttling rats, distant church bells marking the hours. You pass a man crouched beside a barrel fire, warming his hands. He nods at you in recognition, a silent acknowledgement of shared survival. You return the gesture, feeling a quiet sense of camaraderie. Historians still argue whether these informal networks among the urban poor provided effective support or simply masked vulnerability. But to you, the human connections are real, however fleeting. You pause near an abandoned doorway where a child is curled in a makeshift bed of straw and newspaper. His eyes flick open, wary, then close again as he hears your careful steps. You think about the children you've seen all night, huddled against mothers, scavenging for scraps, learning resilience before they've even reached double digits. Some develop streetwise cunning. Others rely entirely on the generosity or indifference of strangers. The variety of survival strategies fascinates you. Some are born of ingenuity, some of desperation. The cold presses harder now, seeping through your coat and gloves. You consider finding another fire, another pocket of warmth, yet the streets offer only limited options. You remember an old man you passed earlier, using old barrels as a windbreak, his body curled tight for insulation. Quirky tidbit. Some people even stacked old wooden crates around themselves to create makeshift walls, a crude but effective method to trap warmth and deter the elements. You shake your head, amazed at the creativity born from necessity. Passing under a low bridge, you pause as a group of rats skitter past, their tiny claws clicking on stone. It's an unnerving sound, yet familiar. The animals are also citizens of the night, scavenging alongside you. You duck slightly, letting the group pass, and continue, silently acknowledging the unspoken cohabitation of humans and animals in this urban wilderness. A distant shout draws your attention. You recognize it as a constable's warning, not directed at you, but serving as a reminder of constant vigilance. You duck into an alley, pressing your back against cold stone, waiting until the sound fades. Every patrol, every unexpected encounter is a lesson in patience and observation. Survival requires not only physical endurance, but also a mental acuity sharpened by hours of navigating these streets. Food, warmth, and shelter continue to occupy your thoughts. You scavenge a few scraps, a crust here, a discarded turnip there, each one a victory, however small. The night is a delicate balance. Risk too much, and you might lose everything. Risk too little, and hunger gnaws at you relentlessly. Your senses remain heightened, picking up the faintest movements, the subtlest changes in the night air. The city is a living organism, and you are a quiet participant, moving in harmony with its rhythm. Every alley, every doorway, every shadowed corner teaches a lesson in adaptability. You marvel at the small communities that form, the shared routines, the informal hierarchies that dictate who eats first, who tends fires, who watches for patrols. Historians still debate the effectiveness of these informal systems, but for you, they are a lifeline, a guide through the merciless hours of winter in Victorian London. By the time you find a quiet corner to rest briefly, your body aches, and your fingers have thawed only partially. Still, there's a small sense of accomplishment in having navigated the streets without incident, collected food, and maintained warmth. The night stretches ahead, uncertain and cold, yet you carry with you the knowledge, skill, and endurance that will see you through these dark hours. Survival, after all, is an ongoing journey, not a destination. Dawn is still hours away, and the streets remain a mix of shadow and faint gaslight. You move quietly, instinctively avoiding puddles frozen like glass, and the occasional horse-drawn carriage clattering over cobblestones. The city exhales a mist that clings to your coat and curls around your boots, a thin curtain hiding the world from view. Every alleyway, every doorway becomes a calculated choice, a potential refuge, a risk, or nothing at all. Your body aches, cold seeping deep into muscles you didn't know could hurt this much. You approach a familiar section near the docks. The scent of fish and brine is sharp in the air, and you spot discarded scraps among the muck. Hunger claws at your stomach, and your hands instinctively search for sustenance. You retrieve a half-eaten fish head, grimacing but grateful. The taste is minimal, but the protein eases your stomach's growl. Quirky tidbit. Some homeless Londoners would collect fish scraps discarded by dock workers, sometimes trading them for small favors or warmth, demonstrating a strange but necessary form of barter. The river itself seems alive tonight, its dark water lapping at the banks, fog curling upward in thin, ghostly ribbons. You watch as a barge glides silently downstream, its cargo silhouetted in dim light. Occasionally, the clank of chains or the creak of wood breaks the ambient hush. Historians still argue whether proximity to the Thames offered more benefit than risk, but you know from experience the river can provide food, warmth from nearby fires, and temporary shelter. But it also brings danger, from drowning to disease to patrols. You notice a group huddled near a warehouse, sharing the weak warmth of a small fire. You step closer, careful not to startle them, and find space to join. Bodies pressed together, sharing heat, hands extended toward flames. There's a rhythm here, a subtle choreography of warmth, distance, and caution. Children cling to mothers. Older men mutter to one another, and you feel a quiet acknowledgement of mutual understanding. The fire crackles, tiny sparks rising and fading into the foggy night. Someone passes around a thin broth in a dented tin, enough for a sip or two per person. You accept quietly, sipping slowly, letting warmth fill your chest before the chill seeps back. Survival here is measured in ounces. A scrap of food, a few inches of warmth, a moment of quiet before the night presses down again. Quirky tidbit. In particularly bitter winters, some would melt snow or collect rainwater to extend the life of small fires or prepare meager meals. Ingenuity becomes a currency, often more valuable than coins. As you huddle, the conversation drifts in muted tones. Stories of past nights, near misses with patrols, scraps found, and fleeting kindnesses circulate. Each person contributes a fragment of knowledge, a lesson learned in the city's merciless streets. Historians still debate whether these oral networks were systematic enough to form a form of social support. But tonight, they are invaluable, a living map of survival strategies. The cold presses harder now, seeping through multiple layers, and you adjust, curling tighter, pressing against the bodies nearby. Every movement is calculated to conserve heat. Rats scuttle along the periphery, their tiny claws clicking against stone, ignored by the humans who have grown accustomed to coexisting with them. The scent of coal smoke, damp stone, and human bodies is pervasive, overwhelming, yet strangely comforting. A reminder that life persists, even under the harshest conditions. A sudden clatter echoes from the far end of the alley. You stiffen, heart racing, and notice a constable moving past, baton in hand, eyes scanning for anyone out of place. You shrink back, pressing into shadow, silent and unmoving. Once he passes, you exhale slowly, heart pounding. Nights like these require constant vigilance. Survival depends not just on warmth or food, but on remaining unseen, predicting danger, and moving with care. You continue along the riverbank, passing familiar fire spots and discarded refuse. Hunger gnaws again, and you retrieve a small scrap of bread someone left behind, breaking it into portions for yourself and the child beside you. Sharing is both practical and moral. Alliances, however temporary, can make the difference between a tolerable night and a disastrous one. Quirky tidbit. Some street communities established informal sharing codes, passing food or scraps in predictable patterns to avoid conflict. A microeconomy of survival that relied on trust and reputation. By the time you find a sheltered corner near an abandoned warehouse, your body is stiff but slightly nourished, your fingers regaining minimal dexterity. You settle in for a brief rest, curling into the warmth of layered coats and blankets, listening to the soft lapping of the Thames and the occasional cry of a distant worker or patrol. The night stretches endlessly, but you claimed a moment of reprieve, a fragile victory in the ongoing struggle to survive Victorian London's unforgiving winter streets. Hours have passed, and the night deepens, cold and relentless. You shift slightly in your corner near the warehouse, feeling the stiffness in your joints. Your body protests, but sleep is a luxury you allow yourself in small increments, eyes fluttering closed for mere minutes at a time. Around you, the city is alive with subtle movement, distant footfalls, the faint scraping of carts, the occasional cough or murmur. Every sound carries information, warning, opportunity, or distraction, and you remain alert, even in rest. You rise again, stretching muscles stiff from crouching. Hunger tugs once more, and your eyes scan the ground for overlooked scraps. A small coin glints near a puddle, partially frozen over, and you reach for it, fingers numbing instantly in the frosty air. Coins aren't just currency. They can be traded for food, favors, or minimal comfort. Quirky tidbit. Some homeless Londoners would keep coins hidden in folded newspaper or scraps of cloth, a tiny personal treasury that offered both security and leverage in a harsh city. You slip it into your pocket with quiet satisfaction. The river's mist curls around you damp and cold, but its presence is strangely reassuring. You think back to tales of those who fell in or succumbed to frostbite along its banks. Historians still argue whether proximity to the Thames increased risk or provided access to sustenance. But you know the truth. Both are present, side by side. The river is a teacher, cruel yet instructive, shaping those who dare to navigate its edges. You walk cautiously toward another familiar section of the street, a narrow lane where a small fire burns in a barrel. Two men sit huddled nearby, murmuring quietly as they share scraps of bread. You approach, offering a nod and a small smile, and they return it with a brief flicker of acknowledgment. In this nocturnal society, gestures convey trust, respect, and a subtle understanding of boundaries. You settle near the warmth, hands extended, allowing the heat to seep into fingers stiff with cold. The night's monotony is broken occasionally by small dramas. A child crying softly after a nightmare, a man dropping a scrap of food, or the distant bark of a stray dog. These moments are minor, yet they punctuate the long hours with life. You observe quietly, noting how people respond, how the community adapts. Quirky tidbit. Some children would learn to trade small items, buttons, scraps of cloth, or coins, for extra portions of food or minor favors, creating an informal economy that mirrored adult survival strategies. Conversation drifts in fragments around the fire, advice on which streets are safest, rumors of patrol schedules, whispers of food left in nearby shops. You absorb it all, knowing that knowledge is as crucial as warmth or nourishment. Survival isn't just physical, it's strategic. Those who navigate the city successfully are constantly learning, anticipating, and negotiating both tangible and social hazards. Historians still debate the effectiveness of these informal networks, but from where you sit, the wisdom shared is tangible and vital. The cold is unyielding, seeping through coats, scarves, and blankets. You tuck yourself closer to the fire, pressing hands together, focusing on conserving heat. The subtle interplay of proximity, body warmth, and shared fire illustrates a fundamental lesson. Survival often depends as much on human connection as on material resources. Even brief alliances can mean the difference between tolerable and deadly nights. You scan the alleyways and rooftops, noting every shadow and sound. The streets are deceptively quiet, yet danger is constant. Patrolling constables, rival scavengers, and environmental hazards like ice or river spray. You move with care, making decisions that balance risk and reward. One miscalculation could undo hours of careful planning. Quirky tidbit. Some experienced street dwellers would memorize entire blocks, noting which doorways, stairwells, and shadowed corners were safest, creating mental maps that allowed them to navigate efficiently and avoid trouble. A distant tolling bell reminds you of the hour. Time is elastic on the streets. The city's rhythm dictates survival as much as hunger, frost, or vigilance. You take a few careful steps toward a sheltered corner, preparing for another brief rest. The fog swirls, lamplights glimmer, and the cold presses in, but you carry with you the knowledge, skill, and subtle networks that make the night navigable. Each movement, each choice, each small victory reinforces your presence, resilience, and adaptability in a city that tests both body and spirit relentlessly. As you settle again, you let your mind drift, cataloging lessons learned, paths taken, and strategies that worked or failed. Sleep comes in shallow waves, punctuated by cold and noise, yet each interval is precious. Tomorrow's streets await, uncertain yet familiar, and you prepare mentally for the continuation of this nocturnal odyssey, aware that each night strengthens your understanding of survival, humanity, and the fragile bonds that tether you to the city and its hidden communities. You awake briefly, shivering as the cold creeps back into your bones. The night has not yet yielded to dawn, and the streets remain quiet but alert with the usual nocturnal activity. You push yourself up slowly, joints stiff and sore, and take a moment to listen. Every sound carries weight. The drip of melting snow from rooftops, the occasional scrape of a cart, distant footsteps echoing faintly against cobblestones. The city speaks in whispers, and you have learned to listen carefully. Hunger tugs insistently, reminding you that last night's scraps only postpone need. Your eyes scan the street, noting any overlooked remnants, a crust of bread, a half-eaten turnip, or discarded scraps of meat from a butcher's cart. You pick up a small, hard piece of bread, wiping away grime before taking a careful bite. It's barely satisfying, but survival rarely rewards lavish meals. Quirky tidbit. Some homeless Londoners would soften stale bread by dipping it in water or thin broth, a clever improvisation that extended their food supply. As you move toward a familiar alley, you notice a group gathered around a small fire, faces pale in the lamplight, bodies pressed together for warmth. You join cautiously, nodding in acknowledgement. Trust here is earned silently, through consistent behavior, careful observation, and shared experience. Historians still debate the cohesion of these informal street communities, whether necessity truly forged lasting bonds or merely temporary alliances. But tonight, these connections feel vital, protective, and grounding. The smell of coal smoke mingles with damp fabric and the river's brine, a sensory reminder of the harsh urban environment. You huddle near the fire, extending hands and savoring the small heat that penetrates frozen fingers. The rhythm of these nocturnal gatherings is familiar. A whispered warning, a shared morsel of food, a subtle rearrangement of blankets to preserve warmth. Survival here is about cooperation without unnecessary exposure, a delicate balance maintained through tacit understanding. Nearby, a child fidgets with a scrap of tin, shaping it into a rudimentary toy. The ingenuity of youth never fails to amuse you. Quirky tidbit. Some Victorian street children were known to craft small toys, even from garbage, creating diversions or bargaining tools in their microeconomies. Play, you note, is an act of resilience, a brief assertion of normalcy in a world dominated by cold and scarcity. Your stomach protests again, and you share a few crumbs with a child, eliciting a quiet, grateful smile. Acts of kindness, however minor, reinforce the fragile social fabric that allows some measure of safety and cooperation on these streets. You absorb snippets of conversation, where the next fire might be found, which patrols are active tonight, which doors or stairwells offer temporary refuge. Knowledge here is as precious as food or warmth. The alley is a microcosm of adaptation and ingenuity. Makeshift windbreaks, layered clothing, and careful positioning around the fire demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of cold weather survival. Historians still argue about the effectiveness of such improvised strategies, but you feel their practical wisdom with every frozen finger that gradually regains warmth. You notice minor adjustments, a blanket tucked more snugly, a log shifted to direct heat, a hand passed for an extra moment of contact. A distant sound of patrolling constables reminds you of the ever-present threat of authority. You press closer to the wall, remaining quiet and motionless. The officers pass without noticing, their attention trained elsewhere. Nights like these reinforce the importance of vigilance, stealth, and anticipation. Every action is deliberate, when to move, when to pause, and when to remain invisible. Quirky tidbit. Some street dwellers memorize patrol schedules and routes, creating mental maps that help them avoid trouble and identify safer areas. Your stomach begins to settle, your body warmed incrementally by the fire, but the cold persists in your extremities. You think about the small communities forming and dissolving nightly, the improvisations and innovations that allow survival. You realize that life on the streets is a continuous negotiation with environment, society, and your own limits, a dance of observation, adaptation, and endurance. As the hours creep toward the pre-dawn chill, you allow yourself a brief moment of reflection. The cold, hunger, and danger are constants, yet so are resourcefulness, resilience, and fleeting moments of warmth and companionship. Survival is measured in small victories, a scrap of food, the safety of a shadow, the shared heat of a fire. Each night is a lesson in persistence, and each step forward, no matter how small, is a testament to human ingenuity and endurance in Victorian London's unforgiving winter streets. The night stretches toward its final hours, and you feel the fatigue settling deep into your bones. Every muscle protests, from the stiff ache in your shoulders to the soreness in your knees, from crouching, shifting, and balancing in the shadows all night long. The streets remain quiet, but vigilant. Every alleyway, doorway, and barrel a potential refuge or a trap. You move deliberately, scanning the environment for threats and opportunities, each step a careful negotiation with the cold, the hunger gnawing at your stomach, and the ceaseless rhythm of the city around you. Familiar markers emerge as you navigate. A discarded barrel fire, its coals glowing faintly under a layer of ash, a tattered cardboard bed tucked into a doorway, and the first faint glow of a lamplight filtering through the foggy morning. These markers are comforting in their constancy, small beacons signaling that life continues even in this unforgiving urban wilderness. You bend to retrieve a crust of bread near the docks, dry and crumbly, but enough to fuel your body through the remaining hours of darkness. Quirky tidbit. Some street dwellers would scrape moss or lichen off damp walls and mix it into soup or porridge to stretch meals. Odd, yet resourceful. The city breathes around you, an organism of stone, mist, and humanity. The faint lapping of the Thames forms a background rhythm, mingling with the occasional creak of docked boats and distant cries of gulls. You notice subtle codes among other street dwellers, nods of recognition, the careful spacing of bodies around fires, and the whispered negotiation of shared space. Historians still debate whether these informal micro-communities offer genuine protection or simply concentrated risk. But firsthand, you see the tangible benefit: warmth, shared knowledge, and temporary companionship. Your stomach protests again, a gnawing reminder that food is scarce and precious. You ration the scraps you carry, mindful of the hours left before the city fully awakens. Sharing is both tactical and moral. Offering a crumb or a sip of broth reinforces fragile alliances and reduces tension. Nearby, children play quietly with makeshift toys fashioned from discarded tin, wire, and wood, a blend of ingenuity, survival, and fleeting joy. Quirky tidbit. Some children even bartered these rudimentary toys for tiny amounts of food, demonstrating early lessons in urban economy and negotiation. Historians still debate whether these inventive acts were born purely from necessity or innate creativity, but their purpose is clear: survival demands adaptability. A sudden shout pierces the quiet, the voice of a patrolling constable. You press against a wall, heart racing, muscles tensing, listening as his boots scrape past. The officer moves on, unaware of your presence. Nights like these are a continuous lesson in timing, discretion, and observation. Survival depends as much on mental acuity as physical endurance, a constant balancing act of vigilance and patience. The cold bites harder as the first hints of dawn creep over the rooftops. You draw closer to a faint fire, letting your frozen fingers thaw while observing others employing similar strategies. Bodies pressed together, whispered coordination of space, and careful rotation of warmth demonstrate the social choreography of survival. The air is a potent mixture of damp stone, coal smoke, and human presence, all layered with the subtle scent of discarded food, the perfume of life persisting against adversity. You move toward a sheltered doorway for a brief rest, curling into layers of coats and blankets scavenged from previous nights. Around you, the city slowly begins to stir. Distant cartwheels, early market workers, and the faint hum of life resuming its daily rhythm. Observing these shifts, you reflect on resilience, ingenuity, and the quiet, improvised structures that allow survival in such harsh conditions. Every small victory, the warmth of a fire, a salvaged scrap of food, the avoidance of danger, feels monumental. Finally, as the first pale light filters through fog and chimney smoke, you breathe more freely. The night's vigilance, the cold, the hunger, and the unceasing negotiation with the city have left marks. Yet, you have endured. These hours are a testament to human adaptability, resourcefulness, and persistence. You step lightly across frost-coated cobblestones, moving toward the slowly waking city. The streets remain merciless, yet you navigate them with care, ingenuity, and the quiet triumph of survival. The sky continues to lighten, washing the city in muted gold and silver. The small victories, shared fires, scraps of food, fleeting gestures of recognition linger like anchors, subtle but essential reminders of human connection. Even in scarcity, moments of warmth, ingenuity, and shared humanity punctuate the struggle. Your senses, once trained to detect danger, now relax slightly, absorbing the city's tentative morning rhythm, the distant chatter of workers, the soft clatter of carts, and the gentle lapping of the Thames against its banks. Walking slowly, you take stock of the lessons the night has imparted. Survival in Victorian London requires constant awareness, creativity, and careful negotiation with both environment and society. The shadows, the fires, the whispered conversations, the careful steps across icy streets, all of these combine into a living memory of resilience. As the night fades fully into dawn, you feel the quiet triumph of endurance, adaptation, and the human will to survive amidst relentless winter cold. The city begins to stir as dawn washes pale light over foggy rooftops, turning cobblestones into a muted mosaic of gold and gray. You rise from your makeshift bedding, joints stiff from crouching through the night, and muscles sore from careful maneuvering across icy streets. Even at this hour, the city feels alive. Distant carts rattle, workmen scurry, and a faint curl of smoke drifts from a nearby chimney. You pull your coat tighter around your shoulders, inhaling the sharp, cold air, knowing that the day presents a new set of challenges and opportunities. Morning in Victorian London is relentless for those without shelter. The streets gradually fill with pedestrians, merchants, and early laborers, some glancing at you with curiosity, others with thinly veiled disdain. You keep your gaze low, moving cautiously, scanning for overlooked morsels or temporary refuge. Hunger tugs insistently, reminding you that last night's scraps are long gone. You spot a half-eaten loaf discarded near a market stall, its edges hardened by frost. You snatch it quickly, mindful of onlookers, savoring the small warmth it provides. Quirky tidbit. Some homeless Londoners would soften hardened bread by dipping it into water puddles or broth, stretching its utility. Navigating daylight streets is an art of balance. You weave between bustling shoppers, shouting street vendors, and carts hauled by horses or men. One misstep, a startled scream, an accidental brush against a passerby can attract unwanted attention. You remember lessons from nights past? Shadows are protective, movement must be deliberate, and remaining inconspicuous is vital. Historians still argue whether day survival relied more on cunning or endurance. But from your perspective, both are inseparable. Passing a crowded market, you spot scraps of fish and vegetable peels left behind. Quick observation confirms no shopkeepers are watching, and you retrieve a small portion to sustain yourself. These minor victories punctuate the monotony, fueling body and spirit alike. The small rhythmic acts of scavenging, observing, and adapting form the backbone of daytime survival. You turn into a narrow alley, a familiar refuge from the busier streets. Daylight shortens shadows and sharpens eyes, yet hidden corners still offer protection. You tuck yourself into a recessed doorway, letting the chill seep through your clothing while observing the subtle dance of street life. Quirky tidbit. Newspapers often discarded served as rudimentary windbreaks or even as padding to soften concrete or cobblestone sleeping areas. Around you, other figures emerge, men, women, and children navigating the precarious balance of survival. Some nod in recognition, silently acknowledging shared experience. Children dart between stalls, creative in play yet alert to danger. Historians debate whether such ingenuity stems purely from necessity or innate creativity, but you recognize its function. Survival demands adaptation. A small courtyard ahead offers temporary respite. Several individuals huddle around a modest fire, sharing warmth and whispering advice. You join them, extending your hands to the flames, appreciating the gradual thawing of fingers and the subtle comfort of human proximity. Conversation is low, practical, occasionally laced with humor to lift spirits. Sharing scraps and tips about patrols or safe routes strengthens fragile alliances, sometimes literally a matter of life and warmth. The sense of morning, coal smoke, damp stone, and discarded food create a sensory map of survival. You watch the micro-rituals of others, repositioning blankets, adjusting layers, signaling discreetly when someone approaches. Survival is as much social as it is physical. Quirky tidbit. Street dwellers often left small markers like buttons or stones to communicate messages quietly across distances. An improvised network of urban intelligence. By mid-morning, you decide to move again. Patience and timing are critical. Lingering too long draws attention from authorities or rival scavengers. The streets grow busier and movement becomes riskier. You glance at the sky, the angle of shadows, and the curling fog along the Thames, each detail informing your decisions. Historians debate whether daytime survival required more luck or strategy, but careful observation, timing, and adaptability clearly matter. As you walk toward a quieter street, you notice a mother adjusting her child's shawl, preparing for another day of scavenging and vigilance. Survival isn't merely physical, it is mental, emotional, and strategic. Awareness, quick adaptation, and subtle maneuvering maintain dignity, warmth, and nourishment. The morning stretches ahead, full of danger, yet brimming with small opportunities, each one a lifeline in a city that demands vigilance and creativity. The markets are alive now, a symphony of motion, scent, and noise. You weave cautiously through the early morning crowd, eyes scanning for overlooked scraps, discarded items, and opportunities hidden in plain sight. Vendors shout their wares with vigor, vegetables, meats, baked goods, and fish competing for attention above the rhythmic clatter of horse-drawn carts. The air is a complex cocktail. Fresh bread, sharp tang of fish, the acrid bite of coal smoke, and the faint sweetness of overripe fruit left on stalls. Each smell is a signal, a subtle hint of opportunity, guiding your movement through the chaos with practiced instinct. Hunger gnaws persistently, a relentless companion. You duck behind a stall, noting a half-eaten turnip and a few scraps of meat a careless worker left behind. You snatch them with quiet precision, aware of shopkeepers' sharp eyes and bustling customers who could betray your presence. The streets are a minefield of social and physical hazards. One stumble or glance in the wrong direction could draw unwanted attention. Quirky tidbit. Some homeless Londoners memorized bakery and market delivery schedules, timing their scavenging to coincide with moments of least supervision. A remarkable adaptation and a form of street-level logistics. The markets are not only a source of food. Objects of small practical value, buttons, scraps of cloth, broken utensils, appear amid the clutter of daily commerce. Each is a potential tool, a token for barter, or simply a piece of comfort. You tuck a small worn button into the lining of your coat, a trivial object, yet a symbol of careful observation and resourcefulness. Historians still debate the influence of these microeconomies on the culture of the streets, but you witness their immediate, tangible impact. Survival, efficiency, and subtle negotiation. Children flit through the crowd, nimble and alert. One boy deftly lifts a small piece of bread, passing it to a companion with a quiet nod. These interactions form an informal social network, a combination of trust, risk management, and survival instinct. Quirky tidbit. Some street children disguise lessons in haggling, evasion, and observation as games, playful yet critical for survival. You watch them, realizing that these small, inventive acts are practical education in urban survival. The rhythm of the market is punctuated by bursts of chaos. A cart overturns, scattering oranges across the cobblestones. A merchant shouts at a customer who bumps his stall. A dog dashes to snatch a dropped scrap of meat. You move deliberately, reading every subtle cue, attuned to hazards and opportunities alike. Awareness is as crucial as endurance. Every observation sharpens your advantage. Near a corner, a small fire smolders in a discarded barrel. A handful of other homeless figures huddle around it, exchanging hushed advice about alleyways, patrol timing, and where the freshest food scraps might appear. These whispered communications are a lifeline, a network of information almost as valuable as food or warmth. Historians still argue whether these communities were cohesive or loose associations, but their immediate utility is undeniable. Morning light filters through a lingering haze, illuminating textures of stone walls, uneven cobblestones, and frost glinting on discarded metal. You navigate cautiously, hands tucked in pockets, eyes sweeping the environment for sustenance or danger. Every step is a negotiation with the city itself, a delicate balance of discretion, stamina, and awareness. Quirky tidbit. Discarded newspapers often doubled as windbreaks, floor padding, or even improvised maps of safer routes, demonstrating ingenuity born of necessity. A child offers you a small piece of bread, a silent gesture of trust and solidarity. You accept it with a nod, understanding that such small interactions form the invisible web that supports day-to-day survival. You continue through the market, noting patterns. Which stalls are closely watched, which alleys remain empty, and where chance offers an unnoticed scrap or forgotten trinket. Mid-morning escalates activity, and the streets grow busier. Market rhythm peaks, and exposure risk rises. You slip into a narrow alley, retreating into quieter territory while carrying both sustenance and small tokens acquired through careful observation. The markets are both nourishment and classroom. Each scrap, each path memorized, each subtle cue observed teaches lessons in patience, strategy, and social navigation. The city is alive around you, chaotic yet readable for those who pay attention. Every scrap collected, every shortcut learned, and each moment of subtle observation reinforces your ability to survive. Markets are microcosms of the larger city, unpredictable, bustling, and full of opportunities for those who move with caution, insight, and ingenuity. The lessons of observation, timing, and improvisation learned here will carry through the rest of your day, shaping every decision as the city stretches into afternoon. The alleys and courtyards of the city offer a strange comfort, hidden from the eyes of merchants, constables, and the bustling crowds above. You slip into a narrow passage, the cobblestones slick with morning dew, and immediately feel the sense of temporary sanctuary. These forgotten corners, though cold and damp, are invaluable refuges, places to catch your breath, to gather scraps, and sometimes even to find fleeting companionship. The walls, streaked with soot and damp, form a protective embrace, muffling the city's chaos to a distant hum. You trudge carefully, boots clacking softly, alert to every sound, every movement that might signal danger. Within these hidden spaces, the homeless have created micro-communities. You notice bundles of clothing fashioned into makeshift beds, small fires burning in rusted barrels, and whispered conversations that carry barely beyond the narrow alley. These are fragile networks, yet they provide warmth, counsel, and the occasional shared meal. Quirky tidbit. Some street dwellers would leave small marks on walls or door frames, scratches, chalk symbols, even scraps of cloth, to indicate safe spots, friendly faces, or hazards, forming a secret map invisible to outsiders. The air here is damp and earthy, carrying the faint scent of mold, soot, and recently discarded food. You crouch near a fire, letting the warmth seep into chilled limbs, and observe a group of men and women quietly exchanging information. Each piece of knowledge about which stalls offer food, which streets have patrols, or which corners remain unobserved is priceless. Historians still debate whether these informal systems of communication were conscious social structures or simply pragmatic improvisations, but you recognize their undeniable impact on daily survival. Children dart in and out of alcoves, balancing play with vigilance. One boy fashions a makeshift toy from a discarded tin can and a piece of string, showing ingenuity that merges necessity with imagination. You remember seeing similar ingenuity earlier in the market, play as both distraction and education, a rehearsal for the harsher lessons of urban survival. Quirky tidbit. Some children developed secret signals, a cough, a whistle, or a subtle gesture, to communicate warnings, alliances, or safe paths without drawing attention from adults or authorities. Movement here requires careful calculation. Even the slightest misstep, a loose stone, a creaking shutter, or an unexpected footstep, can attract attention. You navigate the alleys with deliberate slowness, adjusting your pace to avoid unnecessary noise while staying aware of others who share the space. The social codes are subtle. A nod, a glance, or a quiet adjustment of position signals recognition, respect, or warning. Such interactions, seemingly minor, often determine who will survive the day unscathed. The courtyards present their own small dramas. You see groups clustered around tiny fires, sharing the warmth of both flames and conversation. Discussion is practical. Which streets are safe, which merchants are generous with discards, and which corners might harbor rivals. These exchanges are part of the unspoken social structure, a way to navigate an unforgiving urban environment. Historians still argue whether these alliances were deeply rooted or fleeting. Yet for the participants, the benefit is immediate: shelter, warmth, and information. The sensory detail of these hidden spaces is vivid. You notice the texture of the walls, rough and cold under your fingertips. The faint creak of shutters stirred by wind. The mixed smells of damp stone, coal smoke, and lingering food scraps. Each of these elements informs your navigation and choices, offering cues about safety, opportunity, and the presence of others. Quirky tidbit. Some street dwellers would use scraps of leather or cloth to dampen footsteps, a primitive but effective stealth technique perfected through experience. You pause for a brief rest, allowing your body to recover. The cold morning has penetrated layers of clothing, and the quiet of these alleys provides a momentary reprieve from the sensory overload of bustling streets. Watching the small fires flicker and shadows dance along walls, you consider the precariousness of daily life, the constant balance between observation, improvisation, and caution that defines survival in Victorian London. As the day progresses, you begin to plan your next movements. Hidden corners provide temporary safety, but resources are finite, and the need to scavenge will soon pull you back into the more exposed areas of the city. Yet even in this shadowed refuge, lessons emerge. The importance of observation, the value of alliances, and the subtle language of the streets, communicated through glances, gestures, and whispered advice. The alleys and courtyards, while grim and damp, are crucial theaters of survival. They teach patience, ingenuity, and awareness. You move cautiously but with purpose, recognizing that each step, each observation, and each interaction can shape the remainder of your day. These hidden spaces, often overlooked by those outside the streets, are where you learn the true rhythms of the city, where you find both solace and strategy, and where the delicate art of survival in Victorian London is most evident. Emerging from the relative calm of the alleys, you step back onto the main streets, greeted by the full spectacle of Victorian London waking to the day. Horse-drawn carts rumble over uneven cobblestones. Merchants set up fresh displays of bread, vegetables, and meat, and the air fills with a cacophony of haggling, shouting, and the occasional clatter of overturned crates. The contrast between the alley's hushed refuge and the bustling streets is striking, and you move with deliberate caution, scanning for both opportunity and danger. Every corner, every shadow, every passerby becomes a potential hazard or a source of sustenance. Hunger presses insistently, guiding your movements as much as instinct or experience. You spot a pile of vegetable peelings and discarded bread near a greengrocer's stall. Timing is crucial. One careless observer could chase you away or alert authorities. Quirky tidbit: some homeless Londoners memorized the schedules of merchants, learning when stalls were most vulnerable to allow discreet scavenging, an urban rhythm finely tuned by necessity. Historians still debate whether these routines were learned consciously or emerged organically, but their effectiveness is unmistakable. Children dart between the bustling feet of adults, their movements playful yet pragmatic. One boy picks up a stray crust of bread, sharing it with a smaller child who watches cautiously from behind a barrel. You watch, noting the subtle social codes, nods, hand gestures, and brief exchanges that communicate trust, warning, or opportunity. These micro-interactions form a hidden network of communication, essential for surviving in the ever-changing streets. You navigate around carts loaded with barrels, past vendors calling their wares, and through puddles reflecting the gray sky above. Each step is a calculated negotiation with the environment. Misjudgment could result in lost scraps or exposure. The rhythmic thud of horse hooves against cobblestones mixes with distant shouts. The smells of fresh bread, coal smoke, and damp stone blending into a sensory map that guides your movement. Quirky tidbit: some street dwellers would use these smells and sounds as indicators, learning which stalls or streets were more likely to provide unnoticed scraps or safe passage. Finding a quieter street, you pause to observe. A woman huddles with two children, rationing a small piece of bread while whispering advice about patrol routes and safe hiding spots. The economy of survival in these streets is intricate, unspoken, yet meticulously observed. Every morsel, every gesture, every look carries information and potential. Historians still argue about the extent to which these small communities were cooperative versus competitive. But from your perspective, both dynamics coexist, shaping daily life. You spot a discarded tin cup and a small piece of cloth, simple objects, yet potentially useful. They could serve as utensils, insulation, or trade items. Picking them up, you tuck them carefully into your coat. Every minor acquisition is a victory, a testament to vigilance, creativity, and awareness. The streets operate on multiple layers, those visible to the casual observer and the hidden ones navigated by the homeless, where attention to minute details determines survival. A faint smell of fish draws your attention toward a nearby stall. Quick observation confirms no vendor is looking directly at the ground, and you manage to retrieve a small portion of scraps. The warmth of human proximity nearby, others quietly scavenging, exchanging tips, and sharing fleeting smiles, provides a subtle reassurance. Quirky tidbit: Some street dwellers would use small hand signals or knocks on barrels to alert others of danger or opportunity, creating a low-profile communication network. Navigating these streets is a lesson in strategy and improvisation. Each choice, whether to approach a pile of food, slip into a shadowed doorway, or wait for a lull in the crowd, demands assessment of risk versus reward. Awareness, discretion, and quick adaptation are your constant companions. The rhythm of the city pulses around you, chaotic yet patterned, offering cues if only you watch closely enough. By mid-morning, fatigue begins to set in. Your limbs ache from constant vigilance, crouching, and movement, yet survival demands forward momentum. You find a sheltered corner, leaning against a cool stone wall, observing the ebb and flow of pedestrians, carts, and workers. This pause, brief as it is, allows reflection on the intricate web of human interactions that comprise street life. Alliances, rivalries, gestures of kindness, and small acts of cunning. Historians still debate whether the cohesion among the homeless was more pragmatic than emotional, but the evidence of shared survival is unmistakable. You continue, mindful of time and the growing heat from morning sun filtering through fog. Each step reaffirms a hard-won rhythm. Observe, assess, move, gather, and retreat when necessary. The streets of Victorian London are a living, breathing entity, harsh yet navigable for those who can read its signals, adapt to its unpredictability, and act with both subtlety and boldness. Survival is never passive. It requires constant negotiation with every element of the environment, social interaction, and timing. The late morning sunlight begins to pierce the narrow streets, casting elongated, shifting shadows across slick cobblestones and stone walls streaked with soot. You move cautiously, aware that the day is becoming busier, the risk of observation increasing with each step. Horse-drawn carts clatter past, merchants' shouts fill the air, and pedestrians navigate the crowded streets, often oblivious to the fragile dramas unfolding at their feet. Every detail becomes significant. The tilt of a hat, the direction of a passerby's gaze, the glint of metal or discarded objects that could be useful. You maneuver through the crowd with practiced discretion, keeping your body low, hands tucked, and mind alert. Hunger continues its steady tug, a persistent reminder that each small opportunity matters. You notice a heap of vegetable peelings near a market stall, partly hidden beneath a discarded cloth. Timing is critical. The stall holder could glance down at any moment, or a passing pedestrian might interfere. You snatch the scraps, mindful to move quietly, and tuck them into your coat. Quirky tidbit. Some homeless Londoners memorized merchants' routines, learning when goods were least observed. A streetwise method historians still debate as either deliberate planning or instinctive adaptation. Children dart through the throng, nimble and alert, weaving between carts and stalls with astonishing dexterity. One boy lifts a crust of bread, passing it to a smaller companion, a brief act of generosity born of necessity. You note these subtle interactions, recognizing them as part of the hidden social networks that sustain the most vulnerable. Quirky tidbit. Some street children developed hand signals and whispered codes to communicate danger or opportunity. An informal system historians still argue was essential for survival in the chaotic urban environment. The air is thick with overlapping scents. Fresh bread, fish, coal smoke, and the faint tang of damp stone. You use these as cues, understanding which streets are more likely to offer discarded food and which to avoid due to proximity of patrols or rival scavengers. Observing the micro-rhythms of the market and the flow of people becomes a skill as critical as the ability to forage or evade detection. In a narrow courtyard, you find temporary respite. A few figures huddle around a small barrel fire, exchanging advice on safer routes, patrol schedules, and the locations of potential food scraps. These micro-communities are informal yet vital, providing warmth, knowledge, and fleeting companionship. Historians still debate whether such alliances were intentional social networks or spontaneous clusters, yet their utility for practical survival is undeniable. The sensory richness of these alleys and courtyards informs every decision. You note textures of rough walls under fingertips, creaking shutters overhead, and shadows that flicker with the movement of others. Quirky tidbit, small marks on walls, scraps of cloth, or displaced stones often functioned as clandestine indicators of safety, routes, or presence of friendly faces. A primitive urban map, invisible to outsiders. As noon approaches, the streets pulse with intensified energy. You navigate between bustling pedestrians, carts stacked with barrels, and distracted merchants, each movement deliberate and measured. Every observation is vital. Which stalls are overlooked, which corners offer concealment, and which paths minimize exposure. Patience and adaptability become as crucial as physical endurance. You collect small objects along the way: a tin cup, a frayed piece of cloth, a discarded button, trivial to outsiders, yet indispensable tools for survival. These minor acquisitions reflect a combination of foresight, improvisation, and cautious opportunism. Quirky tidbit, discarded newspapers were often used as insulation, padding, or even subtle signaling devices to communicate across hidden networks. Throughout the streets, small gestures, glances, and nods communicate volumes. Recognition of familiar faces, acknowledgement of mutual respect, or warning of danger allows survival strategies to be shared discreetly. Historians still argue whether these interactions formed a structured social system or remained pragmatic, ad hoc networks. But their function is clearly practical, offering information, shelter, and reassurance. By late morning, fatigue begins to settle in. Your body aches from crouching, dodging, and constant vigilance. Yet you also feel the quiet satisfaction of navigating the city's rhythms successfully, securing nourishment, learning the hidden signs of the urban environment, and maintaining your own safety. Each step reinforces a delicate balance: observation, strategy, patience, and adaptation. The city, harsh and indifferent, rewards those who can read its rhythms, respond to subtle cues, and act with foresight. You continue to move forward, mindful of the changing light and increasing activity. Every alley, discarded morsel, and fleeting exchange offers insight into the subtle mechanics of survival in Victorian London. The streets are simultaneously chaotic and structured, perilous and instructive, demanding constant engagement and adaptation. You walk with an intimate awareness, each step a testament to vigilance, creativity, and resilience, the core tools that allow you to endure another day amidst the city's unforgiving winter landscape. By early afternoon, the city has transformed into a symphony of motion, sounds, and smells. Sunlight glints off puddles, reflecting the hectic movements of pedestrians and horse-drawn carts. You trudge through the streets with a careful eye, noting the subtle patterns of behavior that indicate opportunity or danger. The hum of activity is overwhelming, yet you have learned to tune it into a map of survival. Every shouted price, clattering wheel, and passing footstep provides information if you pay attention, and your senses are finely tuned to pick up even the faintest cue. Hunger remains an ever-present companion, sharpening your awareness and guiding your decisions. You spot discarded vegetable peels and crusts of bread along a busy stall. Timing is everything. The stall holder might glance down, or a passing pedestrian could inadvertently expose you. You move carefully, snatching the scraps and tucking them into your coat without drawing attention. Quirky tidbit. Some homeless Londoners memorized which vendors were more tolerant of minor pilfering, creating mental maps of safe zones for scavenging. Historians still debate whether this knowledge was instinctive or methodically taught, but its effectiveness is evident. Children weave skillfully through the throngs of people, nimble and alert. One boy lifts a small piece of bread and quietly offers it to a companion crouched behind a barrel. These small interactions, subtle as they may seem, form the backbone of the hidden social network that sustains the most vulnerable. Quirky tidbit. Some street children developed a sophisticated system of gestures and subtle noises to communicate safety, opportunity, and danger. An improvised language historians still argue shaped the survival strategies of entire communities. Navigating the streets is a constant negotiation. You move around carts stacked with barrels, past shouting merchants, and through puddles reflecting a gray sky. The scents of fresh bread, coal smoke, and damp stone mix into a complex map of risk and reward. Each observation informs your movements. Which alleys are safer, which corners conceal scraps of food, and which paths minimize exposure to patrols or rival scavengers. A narrow courtyard provides a temporary refuge. You notice a small fire in a discarded barrel, around which a few figures huddle, exchanging quiet advice on safer routes, patrol schedules, and where scraps of food might be found. These fleeting exchanges are essential to survival, offering warmth, guidance, and the occasional shared meal. Historians still debate whether these networks were deliberate or spontaneous, but for those within them, their value is immediate and tangible. The textures, sounds, and subtle visual cues of the streets guide every choice. You notice rough walls under your fingertips, creaking shutters overhead, and the flicker of shadows moving elsewhere in the alley. Quirky tidbit. Small marks on walls, scraps of cloth, or displaced stones served as clandestine signals indicating safety, hazards, or friendly faces. A primitive urban map invisible to outsiders. Collecting minor objects, a tin cup, a frayed cloth, a discarded button, reflects your combination of foresight, improvisation, and cautious opportunism. These seemingly trivial items are, in fact, crucial for everyday survival, demonstrating ingenuity under pressure. Observing and interpreting small social gestures is equally vital. A nod, glance, or whispered word can provide crucial information about threats, opportunities, or temporary alliances. Mid-afternoon brings both fatigue and opportunity. You rest briefly against a cool wall, absorbing lessons learned from the streets, the importance of observation, timing, and social awareness. Each scrap of food, each token of survival, each whispered warning reinforces your understanding of the city's rhythms. Quirky tidbit. Discarded newspapers were sometimes repurposed for insulation or subtle signaling, demonstrating adaptive ingenuity. Historians still argue reveals the sophistication of streetwise knowledge. Even as the streets remain relentless, you navigate with quiet confidence, moving deliberately, collecting sustenance, and interpreting subtle cues. Each movement reinforces the skills honed through countless hours of observation, negotiation, and improvisation. The city is alive around you, chaotic yet patterned, harsh yet navigable, rewarding those who act with vigilance, creativity, and adaptability. By mid-afternoon, you feel a quiet triumph. You have scavenged, learned, and observed, gaining both nourishment and critical knowledge. The city may be indifferent to suffering, yet it rewards those who can read its rhythms and respond with subtlety and strategy. Each alley, corner, discarded scrap, and whispered signal forms part of a delicate ecosystem that sustains survival amid the unforgiving environment of Victorian London. As the afternoon wears on, the city takes on a different rhythm. The streets are still crowded, but movement slows slightly. Merchants negotiate deals, carts pause to unload goods, and some pedestrians retreat indoors to escape the growing chill of the winter day. You take advantage of these subtle changes, adjusting your pace and routes accordingly. Every shift in sound, light, or crowd density provides cues about opportunity or risk. Your movements are deliberate, measured, each step a calculated negotiation with the unpredictable urban environment. Hunger continues its steady pull, though you now carry small rewards from earlier scavenging. Crusts of bread, wilted greens, and a few scraps of meat are tucked safely into your coat, sustaining you for the next leg of your day. Quirky tidbit. Some homeless Londoners would soak hard bread in street puddles or near fires to soften it, a simple adaptation that stretched their limited resources. Historians still debate whether these strategies were conscious inventions or instinctive improvisations, but for you, they are life-saving. Children flit through the streets with renewed energy, balancing play and survival. One boy skillfully navigates between market stalls, stealing a small loaf unnoticed and passes it to a friend crouched behind a barrel. The social network of street children, subtle and intricate, continues to function as both education and survival mechanism. Quirky tidbit. These children often use coded gestures, taps, or brief whistles to communicate, a clandestine language that ensured both safety and coordination, something historians still study as a form of grassroots urban intelligence. You navigate past bustling merchants and horse-drawn carts, alert to the subtlest cues, a pause in conversation, the angle of a glance, a footstep out of rhythm. The streets operate as a living system, and success depends on your ability to interpret patterns quickly and respond appropriately. Observing micro-movements, reading faces, and calculating risk are as essential as physical agility or endurance. A narrow alleyway offers a temporary reprieve. A small fire smolders in a barrel around which a few figures huddle, quietly exchanging tips about safe routes and overlooked scraps. These fleeting moments of respite are precious. Warmth, guidance, and social connection blend seamlessly. Historians still argue whether such networks were structured or ad hoc, but the immediate practical benefits are undeniable. The alley's textures, smells, and sounds inform your next decisions. The rough walls beneath your hands, the creak of a shutter above, and the subtle movement of shadows all provide clues about who or what is nearby. Quirky tidbit. Some homeless Londoners would leave minor marks or symbols on walls, barrels, or stones to indicate safe spaces or hidden hazards. An improvised low-visibility communication system. You collect small overlooked objects along the way. A frayed piece of cloth, a tin cup, a discarded button, items that may serve as tools, insulation, or trade goods. Each item represents resourcefulness, observation, and foresight, qualities necessary for enduring the harsh winter streets. Observing and interpreting fleeting social cues, from a nod to a glance, reinforces understanding of the subtle rules governing urban survival. By mid-afternoon, fatigue and vigilance intermingle. You lean against a cool stone wall, allowing muscles to relax briefly while still scanning for movement, noting patterns, and preparing for the next phase of the day. Each scrap gathered, each observation recorded, and each minor interaction contributes to your ongoing survival strategy. Quirky tidbit. Newspapers were sometimes repurposed not only for warmth, but also for marking paths or leaving messages. Small, clever adaptations historians still discuss as evidence of tactical ingenuity. Even as the streets pulse with life, you navigate with growing confidence. Every step, every decision, and every subtle observation reinforces your resilience. The city is both unpredictable and instructive, harsh yet navigable, rewarding those who move with vigilance, insight, and quiet adaptability. Survival is an ongoing, dynamic process, demanding constant attention, creativity, and social awareness. As the afternoon begins to wane, you feel a quiet sense of accomplishment. Food, shelter, and knowledge have been secured for now, and your movements have demonstrated skill and adaptation. The city remains indifferent to struggle, but those attuned to its rhythms can find sustenance, safety, and fleeting moments of community. Amid the harshness of Victorian London's winter streets, the late afternoon sun casts long, soft shadows across the cobblestones, signaling a subtle shift in the city's rhythm. Pedestrians move with a slower, deliberate pace, carts begin to unload the final goods of the day, and merchants finish shouting their last calls. You use this change to your advantage, weaving through less crowded streets and alleys, your senses finely attuned to every sound and movement. The city has a rhythm all its own, and those who can read it with patience and precision navigate it with comparative ease. Hunger presses quietly but insistently, reminding you that every opportunity for sustenance is precious. You spot discarded crusts of bread near a baker's side door, remnants of the morning's hurried sales. Moving carefully, you gather the scraps, aware of the occasional passerby who could inadvertently disrupt your collection. Quirky tidbit. Many homeless Londoners would memorize the delivery schedules of bakers, butchers, and grocers to optimize their foraging. An informal yet sophisticated system of urban timing. Historians still debate as either conscious strategy or instinctual adaptation. Children continue to flit through the streets, their movements precise, quick, and calculated. One small girl lifts a leftover roll from a busy corner, passing it discreetly to a younger companion. These interactions, subtle and fleeting, are the threads that weave the hidden social networks sustaining street life. Quirky tidbit. Some children developed subtle hand gestures or foot taps as a means of communicating about safety or opportunity, a coded language historians still study for its ingenuity and social function. The air is thick with mixed scents, coal smoke from nearby chimneys, the lingering aroma of bread, the faint tang of damp stone, and the occasional sharpness of spoiled vegetables. You use these sensory signals to determine which streets may harbor discarded food and which are best avoided. Observing these small details, glances, gestures, and patterns of human movement guides each step with precision. A narrow courtyard offers a brief moment of respite. Around a small flickering barrel fire, a few figures exchange quiet counsel regarding safer routes, patrol schedules, and where overlooked scraps may be found. These temporary gatherings are crucial, providing warmth, guidance, and social connection. Historians still debate whether such networks were deliberate social structures or spontaneous alliances, but their practical value is immediately apparent. The tactile, visual, and auditory details of the streets inform every decision. The rough texture of walls beneath your hands, the creak of a shutter above, and the shadows moving silently in the corners all provide critical cues. Quirky tidbit, small marks, scratches, or displaced objects often serve as coded indicators, signaling safe paths, hazards, or friendly presences, a subtle, ingenious form of urban communication invisible to outsiders. Minor objects collected along the way, a tin cup, a frayed scrap of cloth, a button, serve not only practical functions, but symbolize resourcefulness and foresight. Interpreting fleeting social cues, whether a nod, glance, or whispered remark, reinforces understanding of the invisible rules that govern survival in these streets. By late afternoon, the combination of fatigue and attentiveness weighs on you. Leaning against a cool stone wall, you pause to absorb the lessons the city has taught you: patience, observation, and improvisation. Each morsel secured, each interaction, and each hidden pathway contributes to your ongoing strategy. Quirky tidbit: discarded newspapers sometimes functioned as insulation, floor padding, or even subtle signaling devices, a testament to adaptability historians still study as evidence of practical intelligence. Even as dusk approaches, the streets pulse with life and hidden opportunity. Your movements are deliberate, careful, and informed by hours of observation. Survival in Victorian London is not passive. It requires constant attention, ingenuity, and subtle negotiation with both environment and social dynamics. The city is relentless yet navigable, offering lessons to those willing to observe and adapt. By the late afternoon, a sense of quiet accomplishment settles in. You have secured sustenance, knowledge, and small tools for survival. The city, indifferent as ever, rewards those attuned to its rhythms, offering nourishment, safety, and fleeting glimpses of community amidst the harsh winter streets. The sun dips lower toward the horizon, casting a soft golden glow that stretches shadows across cobblestones and alleys. The streets hum with a more languid pace as merchants pack away goods, carts begin to return to stables, and some pedestrians head indoors to escape the fading chill. You move carefully through these dimming spaces, alert to both opportunity and risk. The shifting light transforms familiar streets into subtly altered landscapes, and every shadow, every flicker, every sound can signal either safety or danger. Hunger is a steady companion, now tempered slightly by the small victories of the day. You spot scraps of bread and discarded vegetables along a quieter lane. Timing is crucial. A momentary lapse or a careless movement could draw attention. You gather the morsels quietly, tucking them safely away, mindful of the delicate balance between risk and reward. Quirky tidbit. Some homeless Londoners memorized not just the routines of merchants, but also the exact time of their deliveries, creating a mental timetable for scavenging that historians still debate as conscious strategy versus instinctual knowledge. Children continued to move with remarkable agility, darting between carts, alleyways, and market stalls. One small boy stealthily retrieves a leftover loaf and passes it to a friend hiding behind a barrel. These fleeting exchanges form a vital, unseen network that sustains street survival. Quirky tidbit. Subtle gestures, taps, hand signals, or brief whistles acted as coded messages within these networks, a practical language that allowed coordination without drawing attention, something historians still examine as evidence of urban social intelligence. The smells of the streets shift as the day cools. Lingering coal smoke mixes with the aroma of fresh bread, damp stone, and occasionally spoiled vegetables. You use these cues to gauge which areas might yield unnoticed scraps and which should be avoided due to the presence of patrols or rival scavengers. Observation becomes an almost meditative exercise, parsing micro-signals from the bustling city to inform every careful step. A narrow courtyard offers a brief respite. Around a small fire, a few figures huddle, exchanging knowledge about safer routes, less crowded alleys, and the location of discarded food. These micro-communities, while informal and fleeting, are vital for practical survival. Historians still argue whether these alliances were deliberate social networks or spontaneous improvisations, but the benefits, warmth, guidance, and shared intelligence are immediate and palpable. The tactile and visual textures of the streets inform your movements. Rough stone walls, the subtle creak of shutters overhead, and the flicker of shadowed corners guide your choices. Quirky tidbit. Some street dwellers used minor marks on walls, displaced stones, or scraps of cloth to communicate hidden information, signals of safety, risk, or friendly presence, a low visibility form of urban navigation largely invisible to outsiders. Objects collected along the way, a tin cup, frayed fabric, a button, serve practical purposes and symbolize your resourcefulness and foresight. Reading subtle social cues, from a glance to a whispered word, reinforces your understanding of the invisible, yet vital, rules governing life on the streets. As dusk falls, fatigue sets in. Leaning against a stone wall, you reflect on the day's lessons: observation, patience, improvisation, and adaptation. Each morsel gathered, each minor interaction, each hidden pathway contributes to survival strategy. Quirky tidbit. Discarded newspapers were often repurposed as insulation, floor padding, or even covert signaling devices. Practical, adaptive techniques historians still examine as evidence of ingenious street survival strategies. Even as darkness approaches, the streets remain alive with both danger and opportunity. Your movements are deliberate, informed by careful observation and learned experience. Survival in Victorian London requires vigilance, creativity, and subtle negotiation with environment and society alike. The city is relentless, yet for those attuned to its rhythms, it offers both sustenance and a delicate sense of community. By late evening, a quiet sense of accomplishment settles. You have secured food, gathered knowledge, and navigated hazards. The city, indifferent yet alive, rewards those who can read its rhythms, offering fleeting warmth, sustenance, and connection amid the harsh winter streets of Victorian London. Twilight deepens, painting the city in shades of gray and gold as day slowly yields to night. The streets take on a quieter, almost hushed rhythm. Merchants shutter their stalls, carts roll toward stables, and the murmur of distant voices blends with the occasional clip-clop of a horse's hooves. You move carefully, shadowing along walls and slipping through narrow alleys, every step measured and deliberate. Darkness brings both relief and risk, less scrutiny from passers-by, yet increased vulnerability to rival scavengers or the ever-watchful authorities. Hunger still gnaws gently, a reminder that the day's victories were modest and that the evening will bring new challenges. You collect a few remaining scraps, crusts of bread tucked under crates, wilted vegetables left behind by distracted merchants, careful to remain unseen. Quirky tidbit. Some homeless Londoners would memorize the evening routines of different street vendors, noting who left items unattended. A subtle but effective strategy historians still debate as either learned behavior or instinctive practice. Children continue to navigate the streets with agile precision. One small girl retrieves a fragment of bread from the edge of a stall and silently passes it to a younger companion hiding behind a barrel. The invisible network of gestures, whispered directions, and careful observations ensure survival for those most vulnerable. Quirky tidbit. Coded taps on barrels or gentle knocks on walls acted as communication signals, enabling coordination across the hidden social networks of the streets, a phenomenon historians continue to study for its ingenuity and social utility. The city's sounds and smells take on a different character at this hour. The faint tang of coal smoke, the lingering aroma of bread, the earthy scent of damp stone, and the occasional sharp odor of spoiled vegetables all create an intricate sensory map. You interpret these cues to gauge where to move, which streets to avoid, and which alleys might conceal useful objects. Each observation informs your strategy, demanding both awareness and adaptability. A narrow courtyard provides a moment of temporary respite. A small barrel fire flickers around which a few familiar figures gather. Quiet exchanges provide insight into safer routes, recently patrolled areas, and potential foraging spots. These fleeting alliances, though fragile, offer warmth, guidance, and a rare sense of communal safety. Historians still debate whether such networks were spontaneous or structured, but the immediate utility is undeniable. Textures and visual cues guide your movement. The rough stone beneath your hands, the slight creak of an overhead shutter, the flicker of shadows signaling presence elsewhere. Quirky tidbit. Small marks on walls or objects could discreetly signal danger, safety, or friendly faces. An ingenious urban communication system invisible to the untrained eye. You collect small objects along your path. A tin cup, scraps of cloth, a discarded button, demonstrating foresight and resourcefulness. Observing subtle gestures, a glance, or a whispered warning continues to inform your understanding of the invisible rules that govern street life. As night falls fully, your body aches, yet there is satisfaction in navigating the streets successfully. Each step, each morsel, each interaction has reinforced your knowledge and survival skills. The city is relentless, but your attentiveness, creativity, and subtle negotiation allow endurance. The rhythm of the streets, once chaotic, now feels almost predictable, and you move with quiet confidence through shadows and alleyways. By late evening, a deep sense of quiet accomplishment settles. You have gathered food, secured small tools, and learned from the rhythms of the city. Victorian London remains indifferent, yet for those attuned to its signals, it offers sustenance, fleeting warmth, and moments of subtle community. Survival is an ongoing negotiation, and tonight you have prevailed once again. The city quiets gradually as night settles. The clamor of horse hooves, shouting merchants, and bustling pedestrians fading into a soft, distant hum. You settle into a small, sheltered alcove, letting your body relax against the cool stone. Muscles ache from hours of vigilance, crouching, and movement, yet there is a quiet satisfaction in having navigated another day. The scraps of food you've gathered, the small objects tucked into your coat, and the knowledge of the street's hidden rhythms are your rewards, modest yet vital. Breathing slows, and the tension in your shoulders begins to release. Around you, shadows deepen, textures soften, and even the distant city noises blend into a gentle, continuous pulse. You allow yourself to notice the warmth of a small fire nearby, the faint scent of bread lingering in the air, and the subtle reassurance of brief human contact. A nod, a glance, a shared smile. Each of these sensations reinforces the fragile rhythm of survival. The sensory details that once demanded constant attention now drift into the background, allowing a calm perspective to emerge. You reflect on the day's lessons: patience, observation, improvisation, and adaptation. Every discarded morsel, every subtle signal, every minor act of ingenuity contributed to endurance. You recognize the quiet triumph in persistence and the human capacity to adapt to harsh circumstances with creativity, awareness, and gentle social cooperation. As your body rests and your mind drifts, the streets of Victorian London recede into soft memory. The harshness remains, but it is tempered by understanding, experience, and small victories. Let your breathing deepen, your muscles release, and your thoughts settle. The day's challenges have been met, and now, in the gentle hush of night, you can feel the quiet ebb of tension and the slow, comforting rhythm of survival.